This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney. An eventful week ahead. Yes, we're staggering to Wednesday CPI and retail sales. But, Paul, I'm sorry, we're on the Sweeney watch. Dow 40,000. The market lifts this morning.
The market lifts a little bit here, Tom. I mean, we have a big week in economic data. ECO Go on your Bloomberg terminal will get you where you need to go for all the inflation data and the retail sales data. We also got some earnings. I'm going to be looking at Walmart coming up here. I always look to Walmart to see kind of how the consumer's doing out there. They give you a good view, so that's coming up this week as well.
Already had two requests on China. Damien Sassower, I believe, scheduled in the 8 o'clock hour. His people have talked to my people, and I think we'll get him in here. China doing what is widely anticipated, when in doubt, issue debt, Paul. And they're out there 30 or 50-year tenure. That's sort of a French tenure, like John Micklethwaite's conversation with Mr. Macron later this morning.
Exactly right. So we got China in the marketplace, and that'll bring the view of the sovereign paper into, the U.S. is not the only one that puts out paper. China can do it as well.
They'll do it. We're going to see. We're starting the equity market, start strong with Cam Dawson here in a moment. We're on Apple CarPlay, on Android Play, on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcasts, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, and you'll see us out there. It's growing each and every day. I'll get out in a live chat here in a moment. We're in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios. Futures up 8 here with the Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
You got it in stocks. Well, we can see they're taking a bit of a breather, though, after a rough week that was last week. Investors waiting some key U.S. price data later this week. We have PPI tomorrow, CPI and retail sales on Wednesday. Speaking of retail, we get results from Home Depot Tuesday, Walmart Thursday. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up about 0.2%, S&P futures up 0.1%. Dow futures, though, they are a little changed right now. The 2-year yield at 4.84%. That's down 2 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.48%. And that's down 1 basis point. As far as company news, Emmanuel Macron unveiled more than $16 billion foreign investments. That's from companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley. That's to help spark France's economy. Those projects were announced at the annual Choose France Summit. Then we have Apple. Some news there. Retail employees in New Jersey, they voted against unionization. So that's big news there. And finally, Tesla facing further protests by activists looking to stop it from expanding its German plant. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Lots of distractions over the weekend and on a Monday morning. But the key distraction is our focus on an equity market that won't give up. I thought the bears were sort of quieted, Paul, on Friday over the surge. I mean, the Dow made the headlines up 6 days in a row or whatever. But the answer is we lift. Joining us now with our first important briefing of this morning, Cam Dawson with New Edge Wealth. And people love the holistic view, Cam, that you do. Let me start with that. Why are stocks going up? Why is there a bid to the market?
Stocks are growing up because growth forecasts for both GDP and EPS are going up. And as long as that continues to happen, we think that stocks can shake off a tighter Fed, higher interest rates. The moment, though, that GDP forecasts start to be revised lower, and we could talk about the reasons why, that's when you get a more protracted risk-off move.
The play this weekend was Ellen Zentner and the team over at Morgan Stanley talking about finally a diminished CPI. Do you bring that over to a diminished nominal GDP where finally the earnings revenue dialectic will give up with a little damp and it'll soften?
That's so very important because earnings are nominal and they benefit in a higher inflation environment. And one of the things that drove strong inflation or strong earnings growth during the 2021 period was, of course, inflation and pricing power. So if that starts to fade, you might call into question the 2025 estimates that have revenue growth reaccelerating to 6% and huge margin expansion. About 80 basis points of margin expansion is priced into 25 estimates to a new record high. We think that's only really possible in a high revenue growth environment, which in a way requires inflation.
Is she talking SPX 6000? I mean, is that,
SPX 52, 53. So Cameron, is there a risk to the GDP outlook for the marketplace here? Because, I mean, I guess people feel pretty good about the economy.
Well, we think the estimates have been fully reset, which just means that for a very long time, GDP estimates were just far too low. But now they're well calibrated, which then raises the question, are we all on the same side of the boat? So to the downside, what we're watching is that you've started to see this breakdown in economic surprises. It's plunged over the last couple of weeks. That's because PMI data has been weak, University of Michigan sentiment has been weak. But we also look at the equity market to give us a cue. What we're seeing is that some cyclical sectors are underperforming defensive sectors. That could be an early sign that there's a shift in the growth tone of this market. So we're watching things like equal weight consumer discretionary versus staples. When discretionary underperforms staples, usually you're seeing estimates get cut. So we have to watch that closely.
So, I mean, we're pretty much through the earnings. We're going to get some retailers' earnings this week. But by and large, earnings, how have they come out for you this cycle here? As they kind of give you a sense of confidence in this market, or maybe some red flags?
There's an interesting takeaway is that earnings have surprised to the upside for the first quarter. But what's interesting is that analysts didn't revise up their full year 24 estimates. What they did instead is that they kind of took it out of the back half of the year, which already is very back-end loaded. You have the 493, so the ex-Mag 7 names really accelerating in the current forecast. Then what they did is they actually added growth into 25, which creates the very high bar for 2025.
And now all anybody wants to know from Cam Dawson, out of nowhere, the new zeitgeist is all this AI stuff needs electricity and the utilities are on a moonshot. You and I have seen this before, basically unpredicted, and here we are with utilities up. What do you do with that?
Yeah, I think that you have to appreciate that utilities going into this move were extremely cheap. They were trading at over a 20% discount to the market. They'd also seen sector outflows.
Just sort of caught up.
And so there was, nobody was there, underloved, underowned, so you see this huge snap. You're still not expensive in utilities, and earnings estimates are going up, so I wouldn't put it past them to continue this run.
What do you say to people the weekend, or clients of New Edge, who say, okay, I'm in a 401k, except 53% of the portfolio's in 10 stocks. That wasn't in the textbooks when we were in school.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge because those 10 stocks are the stocks that are buying back the most shares, raising their dividends the most, have the best free cash flow growth. But we think you still have to be disciplined about valuation, which is why in our equity strategies, we tend to trade at a 20% discount to the underlying indices by not owning just highly concentrated in the 10 stocks, other opportunities, because when you see a turn in liquidity, when you see a turn in sentiment, there's a lot more air to come out of expensive stocks than less expensive stocks.
So where do we go there, Cam? Do we think about financials? Do we think about healthcare? Where do you see opportunities outside of the magnificent stocks that Tom has owned, for the last couple of years?
Boy, healthcare has been a disappointment. We thought and the reason it's been such a disappointment this year is because it's been the sector with the largest earnings revision downward. People have had to cut their estimates for healthcare the most versus any other sector. It's very cheap. It has low ownership. However, it continues to disappoint. But there are names within healthcare that are high quality that you can pick. It's just a high degree of selectivity. You could say the same thing about financials, which have been much stronger and have seen earnings revisions higher.
Okay, this is important. I remember when healthcare was in the tank. Paul and I remember this, and it did a moonshot off one thing, Obamacare, which basically came out of, sort of came out of nowhere. Is that how healthcare finally moves? I mean, to United Health and the rest of them, is they need a political policy event?
Goodness, it doesn't seem like there's one on the radar, though. I think that's the challenge. It's not something that's being contemplated in any of the policies that are being thrown out by either party. I mean, it's all tariffs and trade and nothing really about domestic health care.
Cam Dawson, thank you so much. Great way to start the week. I've been fulminating all weekend. I mean, with this cough I got, I've been working all weekend. Nobody wants to be with me. I'm hermetically sealed. And the answer is, there's all these distractions, Paul. There's only one distraction. The Sweeney statistic. You don't know this, Cam. Dow 40,000.
Ooh.
Sweeney mentioned it first.
39,669 on your Dow right now, Tom.
It's just amazing.
Are you going to get hats?
Yes, like our cash-in back in the
merch.
day.
That's good.
Yeah, we can do merch.
I have a Dow 10,000 hat at home. I don't have a triple leveraged all cash on. Cam Dawson, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Futures lift, they're up 9. The VIX 13. 0.36. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom and Paul, Anthony Blinken has delivered some of the strongest U.S. public criticism yet of Israel's conduct in Gaza. The Secretary of State says that Israeli tactics have meant a horrible loss of life of innocent civilians, but have failed to neutralize Hamas leaders.
They will be left holding the bag on an enduring insurgency because a lot of armed Hamas will be left, no matter what they do in Rafah. Or if they leave and get out of Gaza, as we believe they need to do, then you're going to have a vacuum, and a vacuum that's likely to be filled by chaos, by anarchy, and ultimately by Hamas again.
Secretary Blinken speaking on Face the Nation from CBS, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. Over the weekend, anti-war protesters disrupted several college graduation ceremonies. A number of graduates at Duke University walked out of Jerry Seinfeld's commencement speech in protest of the comedian's support of Israel. Social media posts and videos show some students chanting "Free Palestine" as they left the ceremony, but there was no noticeable disturbance to Seinfeld's speech.
I will give you my 3 real keys to life, no jokes in this part.
Well, last night, protesters clashed with police outside of graduation at Pomona College in Los Angeles. The ceremony had already been relocated due to security concerns. And demolition of the last remaining span of the Francis Scott Key Bridge scheduled for today. Officials in Maryland say lightning prevented demolition that was scheduled for yesterday. They estimate the section that will be blown apart weighs between 3,000 and 4,000 tons. The goal is to have that entire channel leading in and out of the port of Baltimore reopened by the end of May. And global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.
Thanks so much, John Tucker. Greatly appreciated. Over the weekend, and Paul, I thought of you like 18 times. People are really affixed on the modern media in like so many different ways. I don't even know what Max is. I don't have Max anywhere in the house.
I bet you do. I think you're paying for it, and you don't even know it.
Okay, I had like a Roberts moment. I mean, are we going back to Comcast 1992?
I think we are. They're bundling up the streaming services, Tom.
So I can't get Disney unless I take Hulu and Max.
I think so. I think that's what's happening, and so it's just
call that 1992.
Exactly. I mean, why do we reinvent the wheel here? But there's so many streaming services out there, Tom. And the question we've asked since really day one, we've talked about this for a long time, Tom, is how many streaming services do you really want to pay for? Will you pay for when this all shakes out? Is it 2, 3, 4, 5? Who knows?
They say they want to raise prices. In your head, what are we paying for each of those things? Like $9 a month sounds about right.
And Netflix has been very good at raising prices and very little price elasticity. I mean, people just kind of pay. And so the question is how much? I mean, can you bundle these things to reduce churn? Churn is the biggest thing because remember trying to cut your Comcast? Yeah. Forget about it. It's impossible. Lisa, but you can just click and cut your Netflix.
Jump in here, Lisa. At my house, there's a wide selection of YouTube and Netflix.
Yes.
And nothing else. Am I missing something?
No, that's all that they watch in my house. My kids. Every time I try to go on Netflix, I get bumped off because someone else is watching it. I can't watch my own Netflix.
But you're paying for it.
I pay for
that
it.
you pay for it. That
They're
Lisa
taking
pays
over.
I took care of that.
Your world, Paul, was a huge point of discussion this weekend.
I know. It's crazy.
People's heads are just spinning on it. Well, excuse me, much more honest. Rumor, Lucas Shaw coming to New York. Brilliant note this weekend from our Hollywood guy. We'll see if we can get some time. Bloomberg Surveillance, good morning.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges and no conflicts of your interest at IBKR.com/RIA. All right, to the markets we go, where we have green on the screen. And this is after the major averages capped a winning week with small moves and a mixed close on Friday. Now investors are zeroing in on more economic data out this week, including CPI and retail sales. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.84%. That's down 2 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.48%, and that's down 1 basis point. To commodities, we have spot gold lower at $2,339 an ounce. Brent crude $83 a barrel. NYMEX crude $78 a barrel. Few companies making news. Intel up 1% right now. The Wall Street Journal reporting it's nearing a deal with Apollo Global Management for an $11 billion Ireland partnership. And Squarespace set to go private in a nearly $7 billion all-cash transaction with global private equity firm Permira. And then finally, Chevron's proposed takeover of Hess. Well, that's getting some pushback. Senator Chuck Schumer urging the FTC to pause that deal, saying that it's going to give the industry more power to raise gas prices. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. On Apple CarPlay, Android Play, 3, 2, 1.
There you go.
Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube and find us there live. Our team is working all weekend. Sweeney's got a beverage of his choice in his hand, and I'm there. I watched a lot of baseball this weekend. Kit Jukes watched a lot of baseball as well. Listen to this lineup forward, folks. Mr. Jukes is SocGen.
Solid.
John Riding of the Bank of England.
In studio.
In the Fed. Lisa Mateo, she was at Costco this weekend. Amanda Lynham of BlackRock.
In studio.
Damian Sassower on the China's mess. Chris Verrone on the stocks. I mean, it's unbelievable what we've got. Kit Jukes joins right now with SocGen. Kit, your note last week really brought me back to Maurice Obstfeld and Alan Taylor, not John Taylor, of our Ute, talking about the trilemma that's out there right now. Before we, get to it, a China bond deal to help them out with their deflation, their GDP. Explain the trilemma we all face this morning with strong dollar.
Oh, we face so many problems with a strong dollar in the sense that right now, the U.S. kind of likes a strong dollar. So it's not such a big trilemma in the United States because inflation's sticky and a stronger dollar would actually be one of the keys to help bring rate cuts forwards, which a bunch of people would like. The challenge that comes with that is that in Asia, the currencies have been beaten up. And they probably, they've fallen to valuation levels that scares people, and they cause concern. They're causing concern in China, Korea, Taiwan, and Japan in particular. And the Japanese have been struggling to get the Treasury, so Janet Yellen, to kind of play ball and bring out coordinated intervention. And that makes intervention less effective, and here we are.
But Kit, here we are, and folks, this is just like a tea leaf out there. The 30-year Japanese peace went out to a yield back to 2011. I'm sorry, Kit, the trilemma for Asia is giving way. What are you at SocGen watching among the tea leaves? Is it Philippine peso to 58? Is it a 168 euro yen? What's a tea leaf we should watch of the trilemma crushing Asia?
We should actually the piece that would hold half the keys would be the Chinese yuan, which has been resilient. It's not a currency that trades freely, but again, we got some weak credit numbers out of China at the weekend. If you see the Chinese yuan start to weaken, I think that puts added pressure on the Japanese yen. We'll be back at 160 on dollar yen, and that will give them a world of concern at the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Japan. But I would start with the things that can make this get worse than it's been, which is China can accelerate that process. At the moment, we're in a lull. I'd also, and I'm going to bring it all the way back, we might as well also just watch the US CPI data, because if that sends 10-year note yields pushing higher, again, the dollar's going to go up.
You know, I was with all the Arsenal guys at the Lanesboro over the weekend.
Oh, yeah.
And I was pontificating, and all I did was spout Kitchuk's letter. His note last week said, you know, it's just great. Watch renminbi. It's going to give way.
Yep,
So
exactly. Right. So, you know, Kit, I mean, is there a reasonable bear case for the U.S. dollar?
Yes, there's a reasonable bear case, at least in a very mild way, that says the U.S. economy has been outperforming. It's been exceptional. American exceptionalism is something we all know and understand, but the economy is slowing slowly. Expectations are so high that we're disappointed by data that are good, but not quite as good as we wanted. So a claims number here or a sentiment number there sort of rolled us over a little bit last week. You know, at a little bit of an ISM number. And so you can see the dollar's very, very strong, and it doesn't take much to roll over. By the same token, it takes nothing to make you think, wow, you mean the European economy isn't negative all the time? You know, here in the UK, GDP came in at 0.6 in the last quarter. And that's just kind of what you mean it's not negative for all the negativity.
Well, that's kind of
so that's where you get the move from.
So, I mean, Kit, Tom and I are trying to book plans to come over to London. Tough to get the suites at the Ned this time of year here. I mean, so give us a sense of how the economy is in the UK, because, I mean, a lot of folks are saying, I mean, do you buy the sterling here?
For a week or two, yes. I mean, I think we have a problem that we have higher rates than most of the other people in Europe, and we're going to cut them a little bit more than they are over the course of the next 12 months. Sterling will weaken when that happens. Very short term this summer, you never know. If you bought some pounds now, kept them for your trip over, they might be worth more. The £5 you have left over at the end might have gone up a little bit, because the economy is growing slowly rather than stagnating. That doesn't sound like much relative to sentiment. The OECD just put the UK at the bottom of its growth forecasts again. My wife just she just raises her eyebrows when she sees those. There's so much negativity out there that it doesn't go down much.
I'm absolutely fascinated by this, Kit, and I've just got to go. I mean, I got Tuesday, 14th of May. Man City plays a Tots. You know they're going to roll over the Tots. So Arsenal has to win here in a week or so, don't they, to take it all?
Well, we have to win our game in a week or so, Holden, to hope that Manchester City draw with someone.
Right.
We'll see if that happens. We're not,
You're not there yet.
Get ourselves all ahead of ourselves.
What did Arsenal do this year that finally put them up near the top and even over the top?
In football, where they have the best defense in the league, essentially, is what's given them where they are. In other words, they locked it up at the back at the same time as scoring enough goals at the front. That is the secret, is to have a defensive structure, which doesn't mean just good defenders. It means a defensive structure where you don't let other teams score goals against you stupidly, which Arsenal has been accused of allowing to happen for longer than some people have been alive.
See how his voice changes when he talks about this?
A little Arsenal.
Thank you so much for coming on. His research note late last week was just brilliant for SocGen, and we also had to get some Arsenal chat in there. I go to a cigar bar in London, and every single person in the place is for Arsenal.
Really?
Like 100%. It's like Yankees in New York.
Yep. Okay.
It's like huge.
All right.
That was great. I mean, to have Cam Dawson and Kit Jukes get us going
Kick us off, yeah.
in our first hour.
People behind the glass doing their job. How about that?
No, but this is. I really can't say enough, and folks, and I saw this in the tape Thursday and Friday. It's incredibly nuanced right now. It's not like a blunt instrument, Dow's up, this, that. There's lots of real nips and tucks. A 10-year real yield, 2.13%, renminbi 7.23, and that devaluation of the renminbi, that's from a societal standpoint, that's a huge deal if they have to do that.
Yep, looking at the yen, 155.88 on the yen, sir. We're back from that 160 level that it touched a few weeks ago, but still kind of a weaker yen here.
Important interviews today. Yellen, Solomon, Macron. You will see all of that on Bloomberg beginning in the 10 o'clock hour. Anne-Marie Horton, Jonathan Farrell, and John Micklethwaite in conversation with these global leaders. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Right now we have S&P futures up 0.2%, Dow futures up 0.1%, NASDAQ futures up 0.3%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.85%. That's down a basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.48%. That's down 1 basis point. Over to commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,341 an ounce. Brent crude, $83 a barrel. Companies making news. We'll start with Morgan Stanley. They're saying they want to add 100 staffers across its Paris divisions. That's as the bank expands its European campus. And then Microsoft, report from the Financial Times, says the company is set to face new antitrust charges in the EU over its video conferencing app, Teams. And finally, with reports that President Biden will increase tariffs on Chinese EVs this week, there's a tiny low-price electric car from Chinese automaker BYD. It's called the Seagull. It has American automakers worried. It sells for about $12,000. Yes, what? And Matt Miller says the craftsmanship is excellent. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Matt Miller is back in.
There was a sighting.
I mean, his 6-month vacation.
the podcast, Hot Pursuits and all that. But, you know, that it seems ages ago, but there it was, the Biden administration scheduled to announce some kind of ginormous tariff on China EVs. Show me a textbook where that works out.
I'm looking at this Seagull, this little EV for like,
very good.
Pretty cool.
Joining us now, John Riding, iconic at Bear Stearns with his public service to his nation at the Bank of England and also at the Federal Reserve System. And we're thrilled he could initiate the arch debate. There's so many distractions right now, folks. Here's a key thing. There's a conventional wisdom CPI Wednesday or soon will give way to a disinflationary trend. Many people are on board that trade. There's a lonely crew saying, maybe not. And we could even see a rate increase. John Riding here to sort out the debris. Could we actually get a rate increase, John Riding?
I think it's extremely unlikely. The Fed moved into a phase where it substituted time at a higher rate, so the duration of which rates are higher, replaced that over raising the rate. So the level of rates was replaced by holding rates and just keeping it at a higher level for longer. And the problem with if the Fed moved to hike rates, it would be a tweak, but markets aren't very good at detecting tweaks as opposed to new trends because the Fed has been not very good at explaining the latest monetary policy moves. And so that was the problem back in December when Powell said it was natural for us to talk about rate cuts, and the market, which had 3 rate cuts priced in at that December meeting, which was aligned with the Fed's SEP projections, suddenly priced in 6 to 7 rate cuts, and you got a massive rally and a massive easing of financial conditions. So on the other side, if the Fed were to hike, it's like, why hike just once? It's got to be the start of something. You could have the reverse happen and a rise in yields that is just not necessary.
You're a student of history of economics. We're now saying we're unsure because we really don't know productivity. We really don't know the technology impulse across our economy. Isn't that normal, going back 50 years where we really don't know at any given point what productivity is doing?
I think that's absolutely true. But there is something, if we don't know and you're the Fed, why have the markets anchor on the idea that in the long term, interest rates are going back to 2.5%, which is the pretense that the Fed has in the SEP and their forecast, and probably the most damaging thing to the message that they're trying to get across, that in the end, nothing fundamental has changed, rates are going to come down a lot, and if you're right on the productivity story, it's higher, then rates are going to be higher, and that's what the markets say.
And Paul, what's so important here was the insight last week with Greg Peters that spreads are price up, yield down to the upper decile of history, and that was in the zeitgeist a lot over the weekend.
Exactly. So, John, there's a lot of folks out there that says this U.S. Federal Reserve is already behind the ball, that they should be cutting rates now, that if you look, particularly if you look at the real-time data, inflation is, in fact, under control, and they should be cutting rates.
Well, I think that what's important, and I said it earlier on surveillance, is that the Fed distinguishes between cutting rates and easing policy, because I do think the Fed should be cutting rates if inflation continues to decline this year, but not to ease policy, but to prevent policy from becoming tighter. And again, we're like missing, the Fed talked about how quickly we're going to raise rates, how high we're going to raise rates, how long we're going to keep there. We've had no explanation of the philosophy of how we're going to get rates down. And as I said, going back to December, when the Fed when Powell hinted that they were going to be cutting rates in 2024, the market took off and priced in far more rate cuts and eased far more than the Fed intended. So I think you're right. Look, as inflation comes down towards 2, it's natural to dial back, to use Powell's term, the degree of restraint. But in the past, he said, look, when the Fed cuts rates, we typically cut rates by 5 percentage points. That was during the era of low rates. And so it's tricky for the Fed to do so because they haven't given us the speech. They haven't driven home this distinction between cutting rates and easing policy. Does the Fed need to ease policy right now? Absolutely not.
So ease policy, what does that mean?
Well, ease policy would be getting real interest rates down. Now, it's possible, and going back to Tom's point on AI, that if AI is being implemented and has an impact on businesses at a far faster rate than prior innovations like the internet or the electric motor over the steam engine or other such things which have been absolutely pivotal in changing the economy. If it really happens so much quicker and productivity is higher, then it's possible that the Fed would have to raise rates in order to stop policy becoming easier. But the Fed's really not teased out yet that this distinction properly. They've moved a little bit, but not properly, between easing policy and cutting rates. And that's absolutely important.
I mean, you're the lone voice who's done maybe Adam Post. You've done service at the Fed, service at the Bank of England. I find the Bank of England headlines so much more illuminating because they actually show dissent, gentleman's dissent, polite dissent within it. Do you prefer their transparency versus ours?
Absolutely, because and actually I put in a note. It was a quiet week last week, and I did some.
Wait, whoa! Preston North End has lost 5 games in a row. Don't tell me it's quiet.
Nobody cares. Bring on the next season.
Bob,
in
John Riding just said no one cares about soccer.
Preston North End.
What is team out of contention for getting into the Premiership? It's they themselves.
I got to Google this now. I'm busy.
But coming back, the Fed suffers from too much groupthink. They rarely dissent. Dissents are far more rare than they used to be.
Yeah.
The language is the same. And I like the idea. Now, I read last week, and probably years should have read it, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Kahneman.
Absolutely.
Kahneman.
Sadly, he passed a couple of months ago. But and he wasn't really writing about monetary policy, but so much in that I found it interesting it could have applied. And one thing that he had is this idea of a pre-mortem. So imagine an FOMC meeting where everyone around the table has to say, if we have made the wrong decision today, what does the next year look like? Could people back in 2021 have all said, let's continue to ease with
out of time, I got to get this in. You codified the golf course in monetary theory. You're the one that wrote about the putting green, which is the ex post ex ante debate. Is there any evidence a central bank can control the putting green and get out front ex ante?
No, but they can commit to not setting of the policy instrument, which is my problem with the Fed still signaling in the long run we expect the Fed funds rate to be 2.5%. You don't know what the policy instrument setting is going to be to deliver 2% inflation. Commit to your inflation target, which they've done a good job in doing. They may even be, to your point, Paul, about being behind. They may even have overcommitted to it. I don't even get the language that the inflation stalled in the first quarter. It's just the rate of decline has slowed. And indeed, as you get closer to 2%, you want the rate of decline inflation to stall. So we're in this situation now where policymakers have committed more to discussing the instrument of policy than talking about the objectives of policy and the commitment to achieving those objectives. And so nobody knows.
Preston is north of Liverpool and Manchester,
a little bit
east of Blackpool. Where do you find these things?
It's like,
But here's the thing.
Writing says
in the late 18th and early 19th century, Preston was the Silicon Valley of the world. The first industrial revolution, the cotton industry, was absolutely centered around that part of the country.
Okay, John Riding.
That's the north of it. So do we call that the north?
See what
or
you
we
do
call
on
that
the
the
show?
Midlands?
No.
What do we call it?
It's the north.
It's the north.
It's the north.
Okay, God forbid. Sorry.
It's up by Scotland,
He
may not come back, Paul.
I know.
John Riding
Manchester.
with Green Capital. Thanks. So John Tucker's like, what are they talking about? With our news in New York City, here's John Tucker.
All right, gentlemen, Antony Blinken says Israel risks fueling a Hamas insurgency in post-war Gaza. The Secretary of State says there will be thousands of armed militants in the area, even if Israel invades the city of Rafah. Blinken is concerned about Israel's conduct of the Gaza offensive.
We've been working for many weeks on developing credible plans for security, for governance, for rebuilding. We haven't seen that come from Israel. We've been working with Arab countries and others on that plan.
Secretary of State Blinken speaking on Face the Nation from CBS, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. A testimony resumes today in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial in New York. Amy Morris has more.
Prosecutors say they only expect to call 2 more witnesses, and they say they could rest their case by the end of the week. Former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen is set to testify today about his role in arranging a $130,000 payment in 2016 to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Prosecutors had not planned to call former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg to the stand. He's currently serving a 5-month sentence for lying under oath. But on Friday, Judge Juan Merchan encouraged prosecutors to at least try to get Weisselberg to court instead of introducing evidence to explain his absence. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Amy. And thousands of residents from a Canadian town being urged to evacuate. That's because a fast-growing wildfire has resulted in poor air quality and reduced visibility. Wildfire maps show the fire burning just a few miles west of Fort Nelson city limits on the west coast, where about 3,000 people live. And this happened Friday, but I wanted to recap it because I think it's worth it. Jim Simons, the mathematician investor who created what many in finance consider the world's greatest money-making machine at his secretive firm, Renaissance Technologies, died on Friday. He was 86. At Renaissance, which is located about 60 miles east of Manhattan, quiet East Setauket on Long Island, he avoided employing Wall Street veterans. Instead, he sought out mathematicians and scientists. The technique was so successful, he became known as the Quant King. Over more than 3 decades, his returns consistently trounced the markets. And that's not even to mention the magnificent contributions he made in philanthropy, especially with the math department at Stony Brook on Long Island. And global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
John, thank you for doing that far more eloquently than I could ever do it. This was one of the great class acts, folks, and basically Mr. Simons destroyed the simplistic Newtonian certitude of modern investment mathematics. I can't say enough about how advanced his work was, and as John correctly states, this is a gentleman who picked a college and said, let's build it, and he single-handedly built the excellence of Stony Brook. Jim Simons, he is dead at 86. We are on a digital distribution now. All of our traditional. Thank you for those on Bloomberg 1130 in New York. Was it with a cab? They're listening to us. They don't care about me or you. They just ask about Lisa. That's all it comes down to. But we're on Apple CarPlay, building out Android Play as well. That's free with the Bloomberg Business app. And on this new experiment, which I'm learning about each and every day, YouTube and the reach of YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Yeah, now we'll look at some of the
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen with NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, S&P futures up 0.2%, Dow futures up 0.1% or 50 points. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.85%, down a basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.48%, down a basis point. Over to currencies right now, the dollar is weaker, Japanese yen weaker, euro, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin up 2% at 62,656. Few companies making news. Alphabet, their shares down more than 1%. Company said to be closing in on an agreement to use OpenAI's technology on the iPhone. And Apple shares right now, they're up about 1%, but retail employees in New Jersey voted against unionization. That's the news there. And finally, Tesla facing further protests by activists. They're looking to stop it from expanding its German plant. Those shares up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Paul, we're looking here at 3 great interviews today. Backing up, we got Macron later in the day with John Micklethwaite in Paris at Versailles. I was just there. I was doing field work for John Micklethwaite. I was out front there,
Yep, always.
Looking at Versailles, and, they have the Alain Ducasse restaurant, and, this is good. Before that, John Farrell with Mr. Solomon at Goldman Sachs.
Yep.
And before that, Anne-Marie Horton with the Secretary of Treasury. What do you ask the Secretary of Treasury?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot going on there. I mean, it's just a question of, how is this economy from the perspective of Washington, D.C.?
But she's also pretty lonely, I would say. I think she's lonely because it's an election year. And anybody with common sense, every decision is made about election. And the New York Times Siena College poll this morning shows that the Biden administration has got some electoral challenges, I would say.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. Anne-Marie Horton with Secretary Yellen to get us started near the 10 o'clock hour as well.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages around the world, brought to you by Interactive Brokers Bond Marketplace. Access our vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities. No markups or built-in spreads and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. Highlight of my weekend, Mother's Day. I couldn't top it head to toe in Knicks merch.
I did. I got the Brunson jersey. I had the Knicks hat. Yeah, I got hooked up for Mother's Day. Of course, I really wanted to throw it off when I was watching the game yesterday, but that's okay.
You said, well, I'm trying to get tickets with Paul to the next game because he's got those tickets he's got. What do you got today?
Okay, this one came from Lucas Shaw's newsletter. Always go to that.
Awesome.
Yes, really good. He's talking about how Netflix, Amazon, and Apple, they want to change the way they pay Hollywood talent. So what he's saying is that Apple has begun basing pay on how the series or movies perform. So, for example, talent will receive bonuses based on 3 things: the number of people who signed up for Apple TV Plus to watch, how much time they spend viewing, and the cost of the program relative to the size of its audience. So this is something different. It's saying Netflix, Amazon, they're also considering performance-based compensation, but it's something different as to how
I read every word thinking of Paul Sweeney, Lisa, and Paul, to me, and the back end of Lucas Shaw's brilliant note is, okay, show us the data.
Yeah.
And they think they have a rule book different than the days where we knew Gunsmoke was number 1 on TV.
Exactly right. You're exactly right, Tom. So, I suspect the talent, and more importantly, their agents will be like, okay, that's fine, but show us
the data.
The data. We don't mind getting the back end, and as opposed to
Shogun does well, and something else doesn't do as well.
Yep. So,
but you got to show the data.
But again, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, they're the ones that have the money. They have the checkbooks these days. So they can drive the show.
Yes. Okay. So along similar lines, we've been talking a lot TV advertising, how it's been going down, but a lot of brands moving away from TV advertising. They're moving to Google, Meta, TikTok to reach these new audiences. Here's an example. Mondelez, they wanted to promote this limited edition Oreo cookie. Nice. So they didn't spend a dime on TV advertising. Whoa. Where they went to Instagram, they went to TikTok, they went to the websites of large retailers like Amazon and Walmart. So you're seeing this shift because the people they're trying to reach, the Gen Zers, shoppers, multicultural audiences, they aren't watching enough TV.
And so this is May, Tom.
Yeah.
May is a time for the upfronts, which we've been done since the beginning of time for television, where the TV networks sell maybe 80% of their next year's advertising inventory today in May for a discount. Does that even matter anymore? Are brands even spending on broadcast and cable television? And here's the data from the Wall Street Journal story. The maker of Ritz Crackers and Sour Patch Kids candy is spending about 15% of its U.S. ad budget on TV this year, down from 42% 3 years ago.
And what's important here, Digiday had this. I read it cover to cover now, learning about YouTube and what we're doing on Bloomberg surveillance. And Lisa, they have great, legitimate math that on Instagram, most people look at the still photos. They don't look at the reels. And the math's like 6 to 1. It's huge. Where the reels, okay, cute, great, nobody cares. They look at still photos for messaging.
It's interesting because it used to be the opposite.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, that little shift there.
I don't know. Next.
Okay. We've been talking about inflation data, right? PPI, CPI, but apparently chicken sales. That's what people are looking for the new inflation gauge, okay? Because shoppers trade down to chicken from pricier meat cuts when food prices are high. So that's what they're seeing, that shift. So diners are buying more chicken wings at fast food places, frozen tenders at grocery stores. You had Tyson Food, they're bringing in higher profits from poultry instead of their other meats. Restaurants pushing chicken options. So you start to see that cheaper chicken prices, though, not likely to stay for long, of course, because wholesale prices, they're rising. The demand's ticking up. Supplies are starting to thin out. But looking to chicken.
A dwindling supply of cattle in the U.S. means meat packers like Tyson are paying more to secure their livestock. Where are all the cows going? What's the big deal? What's the big thing?
Goldman Sachs did a
cows.
beautiful exercise on this, I'm going to say 15, 20 years ago. And, it links beef with pork and with chicken, and the dynamics are very sophisticated. About,
chicken.
Should we raise more cows or not? And then somewhere in the rest of the country, it's like, what do we do with the pigs, and then what do we do with the
good pork
chickens?
bellies? Can't eat a good pork belly.
We're eating way more chicken at home.
I eat more chicken. I know, because it's cheaper.
You can't eat beef all
No,
the
you
time.
can't eat
So
all the
chicken
time.
you can eat more frequently, right?
You're
the health expert. You tell me.
And turkey, ground turkey. Yes.
Okay. Very good. I'm not eating
ground
that.
turkey.
I won't go that far.
Come on, you got to switch to the ground turkey.
Next, because I don't want to hear about ground turkey.
Okay, my favorite story of the day.
Not good.
Costco becoming the hotspot for adult birthday parties. Okay, so it's blowing up on TikTok.
Penfolio.
Here's how it works. Okay,
Route 10.
I hope my husband is listening to this. But the unsuspecting birthday person, all right, they start seeing them random friends, relatives throughout the store as they're shopping. And they're like, oh, it's a coincidence. How nice. Everyone's here today. And then all of a sudden, when they're done checking out, they go to the food court at the end, and there everybody is. Surprise, surprise. They sing happy birthday. It becomes this whole party. But one person said it's because it's a cheaper alternative. Okay, she spent just $30.88 on her birthday dinner for 7 people because they bought hot dogs and soda combos. Okay, that's what it's coming up to. They wore Costco hoodies, got into all the the birthday celebrations. So it's cheaper. I mean, unless you go on a Costco shopping spree like me and you spend $500, and it's not really cheaper. But
so this party was
trend.
hosted at the Fort Oglethorpe Costco warehouse in Ringgold, Georgia. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm not. So is it the hot dog? Is that the thing?
It's
to eat
the
there?
hot dog soda combo. It's like $2 or something.
But people
like,
love the
crazy.
Costco hot dogs.
I know.
Right?
My mother goes to Costco for 2 things: the hot dog and vodka, and that's about it.
I'm with her on the vodka.
Say that again.
Mom.
My mom loves
just woke up.
Costco
Happy Mother's
for
Day, Mom.
the hot dog and the vodka. That's what she goes
That's
there
all
for.
you need. What else?
That's it.
I can live on that.
But
So,
you
all right,
have
so
to
we're
have a
at Costco.
membership to attend the party. That's the other thing, how they kind of try and
I'm not a member. I don't
Yeah,
think.
so you're not a member. You can't go to the
I
party.
might be a member. Okay,
No,
so you have to get a member.
be a
How
member.
do I get a member? I just go Costco.com.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Ending on Costco. Can we get,
Rich
can
Truman,
we,
large at
should we
Costco.
know that we're going to Costco this coming weekend?
Sure.
See a Lisa Mateo sighting?
Yep.
Get the
We'll go
foo
there.
over there.
Where's our Costco, Lisa? Where do we go?
Costco, I go to the one, there's one in North Plainfield, there's one in Union,
All right,
there's
all
one
right.
in New Jersey, I know.
There's not one in the Upper
There's a big one in
East Side
Brooklyn,
for Tom,
actually.
right? There's not one in
No.
the Upper East Side for Tom. Okay.
You can go to Brooklyn.
Okay. Very good.
Very good. The birthday to one of the giants. See the video on We Are the World. Stevie Wonder, just extraordinary. Stevie Wonder living for the century. We'll do a lot of Stevie this week. 74.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in that fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Bloomberg Surveillance on a Monday. Nuances out there. Really twisted tape. It started 3, 4, 5 Wall Street days ago, say Wednesday last week, and it's just Fascinating here, and into an economic soiree Wednesday. Retail sales, CPI all at once, PPI before that, but none of it in this hour. Amanda Lynham joining us. We had John writing earlier, Kit Jukes, all these others. We're efforting Roaring Kitty.
Really?
Roaring Kitty.
Is that a GameStop?
That's a guy, Keith Gill, who made GameStop go. Lisa's playing this at home.
Yep.
She plays dumb, but no. You're on are you on the couch with a laptop popping, Robin Hood and GME?
I am not, but I just was looking at that Roaring Kitty story.
It's
up
30%. Yeah.
It's up 28% today.
Up huge, 29%. It's crazy.
Roaring, if you're out there, we'd love to speak to you. Anyways, we'll have that. And Jess Benton, among others, is on that.
She's on.
As well. Paul, it was a mirage. I really hadn't had the first cup of Sanka. I think I saw a Matt Miller sighting.
Yes, and thank goodness he shaved the beard off. So he's a professional. He's looking professional. He's got a TV show apparently. I think that goes at 9 o'clock or something. So
he's got
back
Hot
on the
Pursuits, the podcast.
Yeah, he's back. Who knows what
cars.
he's doing? Yeah, I don't know what he's driving here.
The president's doing a tariff on the Chinese. Maybe he's back for that as well. Important conversations today. Yellen, Solomon, and Macron. Look for that. We'll tell you about that later as we can. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by CohnReznick Advisory Assurance Tax. CohnReznick's enterprise risk management solutions can help your company drive value through stronger compliance and reporting procedures. Visit CohnReznick.com. Amanda Lynham with us. Let's get right to it. Our Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Lisa Mateo.
You got her in a slight lift to the markets. Investors kind of waiting key economic data later this week, including PPI tomorrow, CPI, retail sales on Wednesday. Speaking of retail, we get results from Home Depot Tuesday, Walmart on Thursday. So let's get to the markets. Right now, the NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, S&P futures up 0.2%, Dow futures up 0.1%. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.85%, down a basis point. 10-year yield at 4.48%. And that's down a basis point. A lot of company news. Start with Intel up 1%. Wall Street Journal reporting nearing a deal with Apollo Global Management for an $11 billion Ireland partnership. And this coming out of the annual Choose France Summit. Emmanuel Macron unveiled more than $16 billion foreign investments from Amazon, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley to help spark France's economy. And finally, you talked about it, Tom. GameStop shares, look at this, 31% right now, on track for the best month since March of 2021. Follows that cryptic post from Keith Gill known as, yes, Roaring Kitty. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Over to you, Tom and Paul.
This is the conversation of the day about the fundamentals around the markets of equities following bonds, commodities off bonds. And that is that everything is priced to perfection. In China, price up, yield down. Across all of the Western world, price up, yield down. Amanda Lynham joins Macro Credit BlackRock. Let's start with the why. Why is there a bid to bills, notes, and bonds?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. If I had to pick two reasons, it would be one, that growth has still been resilient in the U.S. So specifically, when you're looking at speculative grade issuers, high yield issuers that are very growth sensitive, the growth backdrop has been supportive. The second reason is the all-in yield opportunity. Even though spreads are very tight optically, the risk-free rate remaining elevated has allowed capital allocators to deploy in credit, and that's been another key tailwind.
Have we gone far enough where there's a siren call to sell, price up, yield down to capture total return?
I think at an aggregate level, we think that spreads can remain pretty range bound. The exception, though, Tom, is that we are not expecting triple Cs to catch a bid. So far, they've lagged the overall rally in spreads. If you just zoom in on U.S. high yield spreads are below 300 basis points. That would argue for triple C spreads somewhere in the 600s. They're in the 720s range now. So it just goes to show you that the market is efficient. The market is telling you that not all corporates can navigate this high cost of capital. We don't expect a material spread widening, but I think for further tightening, you need to see participation from that triple C cohort, and we just don't really see that in the near term.
All right, I'm looking at INGO on the Bloomberg terminal, the Bloomberg Index browser, and the only green I see in fixed income is high yield.
Yes.
Are there sectors that you like here versus others? Because as you've mentioned, and we've heard from others, spreads are very tight here.
That's right.
So you have to be kind of smart, I think.
That's right. And it's really that duration exposure in IG that's keeping it in negative territory. So yes, high yield, shorter duration product in positive territory. I think it's really tricky. One of the things that we highlighted in our weekly last week was heading into this election cycle, we're kind of bracing for policy impacts at the sector level. I would say for now, we're pretty constructive on commodity producers, financials, actually cyclical areas of the market. I think underneath the surface, however, if you're in discretionary products, you want to make sure that they're targeting customers that are at the higher end of the income spectrum as opposed to the lower end. You were talking about the consumer earlier, very bifurcated. The high end of the consumer is generating a disproportionate share of the spending right now, rock solid in terms of gains in the house price appreciation, gains in equity markets. The lower end consumer with student loans, credit cards, car loans is in a much more vulnerable position. And so I think that channel, that category will really make a difference.
Credit quality.
Yes.
How's it look out there? Because we've had, I'm used to the credit market blowing up every once in a while. I haven't seen anything, have I?
We've seen defaults quietly peak up to the 5.5%, 6%, which is elevated above the historical trend of say 3.5% to 4% on an issuer-weighted basis. But you're right, given the tightening in bank lending conditions, given the hikes in interest rates, you would have expected defaults to be in the 9-10% range. We haven't seen that. Part of the reason we believe is the growth of the private credit market, which has allowed corporates to actually have another viable funding option outside of the public markets and outside of the banks.
I mean, my chart of the year, I'm stealing it from a reader. I'm sorry, I can't cite who it's from, but it may be global yield to worst. Let me look at the Amanda Lynham chart, which is corporate yield to worst. I'm out 3 standard deviations, and the only time I've been here was 2008. Remember how much fun that was? Okay, by definition, yields are incredibly expanded. It's got to be the mother of all buy opportunities. What do you do with 60-40? Are you running 50-50?
Well, we agree that there is a really attractive opportunity to deploy capital given all-in yields at the moment. Corporates, though, have been able to navigate that because growth, again, has remained supportive, and they've entered this from a position of strength where they've issued and pre-funded in 2020, 2021, where rates were really low. What we're seeing, Tom, is that actually when these corporates are coming to market to refinance, which we've seen a lot in IG and high yield, there's demand, there's appetite. Books are
demand. Oh, come on. There's 5 phone calls.
There's huge demand.
They call up BlackRock. Larry, how much do you want today? Microsoft, 3.3% weight of debt. They have 97% in equity, 3%. What are they doing out there? They make 5 phone calls to Fido, BlackRock, and 3 other victims, a sovereign wealth fund somewhere. They sell the thing literally by lunch, right?
There's broad-based participation in the primary markets at the moment. We've seen books using Bloomberg data actually 3 times oversubscribed, new issue concessions in the low single digits. It's a broad-based participation, and it's been very orderly. Actually.
I mean, Paul, quick, Paul, get one more in here, but I'm sorry. You do a corporate debt offering and put it in Sweeney 2 years.
I know, exactly. It's just amazing. You can get that a nice return there. So, Amanda, again, talk to us just about the new issuance market here. I mean, why is there such demand from the issuers to issue paper at these higher rates? I guess that's the new normal now? That's where we are?
I think a prudent CFO and treasurer is looking a couple years ahead in their maturity wall. In 2020 and 2021, as we discussed, corporates were very proactive. They were pre-funding 3-4 years in advance. Fast forward, they have now more work to do. I think, in general, high-yield firms have appropriately been getting ahead of that maturity wall. I think one of the nuances that's maybe not discussed a lot in the markets is that high-yield issuers don't let their bonds mature or don't let their bonds become current. They don't let their bonds become due within 12 months for a host of accounting reasons. So they will often start to chip away at maturities well in advance. And I think that's just a prudent thing in this higher cost of capital market while the demand is robust.
A clinic. Amanda, thank you. Amanda Lynham with BlackRock here on the incredibly real demand for debt. Also, there's an incredibly real need for our news from New York City. Here's John Tucker.
All right, thanks, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. The star prosecution witness in the hush money trial of former President Trump is set to take the stand today. Let's get the latest from Bloomberg law host June Grosso in New York.
On Friday, jurors saw Donald Trump's 2018 tweets defending a $130,000 hush money agreement with adult film actress Stormy Daniels. ahead of potentially explosive testimony from Michael Cohen, the star prosecution witness who made the payment on Trump's behalf. Prosecutors have been laying the groundwork for Cohen's testimony because he comes to the stand with a lot of baggage that will surely be explored on cross-examination. In New York, June Grasso, Bloomberg Radio.
And Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has delivered some of the Biden administration's strongest public criticism yet of Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza. Blinken saying that Israeli tactics have meant a horrible loss of life of innocent civilians, but have failed to neutralize Hamas leaders.
Israel's on the trajectory potentially to inherit an insurgency with many armed Hamas left, or if it leaves, a vacuum filled by chaos, filled by anarchy, and probably refilled by Hamas.
Secretary Blinken spoke on CBS's Face the Nation, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. And over the weekend, anti-war protesters disrupted several college graduation ceremonies. A number of graduates at Duke University walked out of Jerry Seinfeld's commencement speech Sunday in protest of the comedian's vocal support of Israel. And officials in Baltimore, Maryland, demolition of the last remaining span of the Francis Scott Key Bridge scheduled for today, according to the officials. Yesterday, the lightning prevented them from demolishing the bridge span. They estimate it weighs anywhere between 3 tons and 4,000 tons, and they have to break it apart. The goal is to have the entire channel leading in and out of the port of Baltimore reopened by the end of this month. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.
John, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance. We're brought to you by BNY Mellon Insight. Let me spell it. Insight, I-N-S-I-T-E. Insight, that's June 4th to the 6th in Nashville. Don't miss the essential event for the financial advice community. Visit insight.bnymellon.com in Nashville, June 4, June 6. Insight.bnymellon.com. Paul, I got a modeled GameStop. 3.9 standard deviations up is where we are.
Tom, I have no idea. I'm just going with the Bloomberg News reporting. GameStop shares rose for the kind of surge last seen during the meme stock mania of 2021. The stock jumped as much as 38% in pre-market trading, putting the video game firm monthly gain on track to top 87% rally its law in 20. Apparently, Tom, Monday's move follows a cryptic post on X, you know X, from Keith Gill,
Roaring
more popularly
Kitty,
known as social media analyst Roaring Kitty. So I guess that's all you need. That's all you need.
With teenagers, like you're in a fog over the weekend. I mean, you have no idea what they're doing.
No.
So, afterthoughts being afterthought. And she's talking about Kitty all weekend. I just assumed it was Hello Kitty.
Yep. No.
It's not Hello Kitty.
This is Roaring.
She's in the bed with a laptop. Getting out front on GameStop Monday morning with Roaring Kitty. Futures up 12, Dow futures up 70. On the Sweeney watch, Dow futures 39,711. We're on YouTube. Here's the way it works. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. When you go and search for Bloomberg Podcasts, you can find us there live and a 2-hour, 56-minute redo. Good morning.
Hits, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. A bit of a lift to the markets. We have NASDAQ futures up 0.3% or 56 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 69 points. And S&P futures up 0.2% or 11 points. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.85%, down a basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.48%, down a basis point as well. Over to commodities, spot gold lower, $2,348 an ounce, and Brent crude at $83 a barrel. Few companies making news. Morgan Stanley, they're adding 100 staffers across its Paris divisions. The bank expanding its European campus. Those shares up nearly 1% right now. Microsoft, a report from the Financial Times says the company set to face new antitrust charges in the EU over its video conferencing app Teams. And finally, McDonald's looking to launch a $5 meal deal in the U.S., attracting consumers on that tight budget who love their Big Mac sandwiches, I guess. Franchises, though, they're not happy about it, so we'll see if it happens. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
You got to drive traffic, Tom, during these tough times. I mean, a lot of folks out there are hurting, and so you got to. We see that with the some of the.
I agree.
The fast, some of the restaurants like the Fridays and the, all this.
I don't think enough's made about housing.
Yeah,
top to bottom.
Yep.
From the very and I get it. It's going down, particularly out west. Good morning to all of you out across the Mississippi River listening this morning. We love hearing from you on YouTube live chat. The problem is, live chat lights up when SAS hours. I know. I mean, he's become, All
right, Tom, this is what our terminal users need to know. BI space EMFI. That takes you to your emerging markets fixed income dashboard.
Right.
I help pay for this thing. I never go to it because I don't understand.
Paul always reminds me of that.
But it is one of our most highly read research on Bloomberg.
I'm at Little Pepper in College Point this weekend going all Szechuan, and I'm pontificating about the Chinese experiment.
Pontificating, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, like literally 6 hours later, they put out the feelers there Monday morning on a bond offering. We just had we talked to Kit Jukes about the trilemma out there. You studied the trilemma at Vanderbilt. Great. What is the bond trilemma for China this morning?
Okay, so, this is all scheduled, and a lot of this is priced in. $138 billion of bonds, long-dated bonds. So, obviously, they're taking advantage of lower yields in China. The 30-year. This is going to be a combination. It's going to be a combination of 20, 30, and 50-year debt out of China. Just by way of example, the 30-year rate in China is 255. Here in the U.S., it's what, 463 or something crazy.
And that 255 is back to 2011.
It's as low as they're going to find. So, basically, what they're doing is they're trying to, basically fund low. It's going to be fiscal stimulus, but the problem here is they're going to be stimulating strategic industries like chips, like clean energy, and it takes time to put that money to work, Tom. So whether or not we expect this to translate into a higher GDP over the short term, I don't believe it will.
Within the trilemma, Maury Obstfeld and Alan Taylor, the bottom line is currency gives way. Do you model or do you predict, as Audrey Child Freeman say, you're going to see renminbi devaluation?
I think you might have, of course, no, I think you have to. Look, at the end of the day, it's a managed currency. They're doing a great job of managing it and keeping FX volatility, low, but I just think it's going to be really difficult going forward for them. Especially as their economy opens up and as, kind of access doors go down, it's going to happen inevitably. And so, look, I think the real action right now is what we're seeing in the broader EM complex, Tom. Romania this morning left rates on hold 7% just a few weeks ago. I'll tell you why. Eastern Europe has had the highest inflation during the pandemic and coming out of it across any place on the planet. Romania is a part of that, and Romania is basically, finding religion. They're saying we can't cut rates. A few weeks ago, it was fully priced in. They were cutting rates here. They're not cutting rates anymore. And you're seeing, I guess what you would call hawkish cuts by Brazil. You're seeing evidence across the whole of EM that this divergence in central banks is really not going to be as large as what would otherwise be believed with the Fed on hold.
Is there 1994 or 1998 instability, or is this all choreographed in a way that Jerome Powell will say, we got things under control?
So the instability shows up in the currencies, Tom. We know this, right? So of the G7, it's going to be the pound and obviously the Japanese yen that are going to be most vulnerable of these digital moves, right?
Euro yen 168. Good morning.
And the Philippine peso, their central bank is reporting on Thursday, and it's the worst performer today, Tom. You know about the peso because markets are pricing in the fact that Philippines might have to cut rates, so they're penalizing those economies that much more. But I think really at the end end of the day, what we're looking at here is a VVIX at a 9-year low. So it's risk on here in the broader financial markets. And I think if you just look at forward implied probabilities of where inflation is going to be in the SPX, I'm sorry, of where, the big moves in the SPX are going to be, it's going to be obviously May 15th. It's going to be CPI. It's going to be NVIDIA earnings the week after. And you just look at payrolls on June 7th, Tom. I mean, the markets aren't pricing in much price action there. So, it's going to be a nice sleepy summer. It's golf. It's,
No idea.
Let's go.
No idea.
Rory came back.
Lisa's
at
going to give me
Quail
the synopsis after he walks out of
Damien,
here.
Jess Minton can help you with this.
Rory came back at Quail Hollow.
I know. You were talking about Rory last week. We were talking about him. He's been looking really sharp. I'm really excited for this golf season. I have to say, I was low net at the opening tournament at Tamarack this weekend. The Edmond. With a little bit of store credit there. Shout out to Matt Kolakowski and others who really carried us that day. It was really wonderful.
Very good.
Now, your coach, is it 3 days a week you're on the green coaching?
All right, truthfully, probably try to get out about 3 days a week. That is about right. Yeah.
Starting to warm up here in the Northeast, folks.
Lisa, you and I have no lives.
Wow,
I mean,
that's pretty good.
But only in the afternoon. Even if I just a little chipping, go to the range. I don't need to get out for 9 holes. I mean, and 18 holes. Forget about that. I can't spend 4.5 hours on a golf course. I've got 3 children.
He's got too much time. Where's the money going? Is money coming into EM? It's not my money, I'll tell you that.
Interestingly enough, my analysis says yes. Emerging market local debt, specifically the large liquid economies of India, Brazil, China, are seeing inflows. South Korea, they're seeing inflows from foreign investors, which is pretty promising for an asset class which is down roughly 3.5% year to date.
One more question. We asked this of Amanda Lyon. We opened with her with this at BlackRock.
Love Amanda.
I mean, ask you the same thing. There's a global bid to paper, bills, notes, bonds. Why?
For treasuries. I mean, look, I think, I think, what we're seeing here is, I don't know if that demand's really going to be there. Quite frankly, I think what we saw after the Fed decision is we saw short covering in SOFR futures. That's kind of moved further out along the curve. A lot of people were positioning pretty hawkish, into that meeting. I think that's all being rolled off. I think Chair Powell has done a great job of taking the top off the market, and it's back to, tail risk hedging and buying of treasuries and buying of fixed income, I think.
Dumb question. I remember when Tim Cook did a Apple piece in Swiss francs. Why don't they garner some goodwill and do $1 gajillion
in Swiss francs?
In renminbi.
Well, I think, you have to, first of all, you have to have the bank hedges in place. And so, like I said, they have capital controls, which won't let banks take down as much of that risk on a currency hedge basis. So it's not Japan, it's not South Korea, where their currencies are really liquid, where you can really kind of hedge your FX exposure. So, China's a little bit of a different animal.
It's 8:23 Wall Street time. He's exiting. I saw the car waiting on Lexington Ave.
Exactly.
My son starts his internship today, by the way.
Where?
Fresh. I can't say the name. I don't want to divulge. It's a fixed income shop, a really successful one. He came home last week from University of Miami.
I saw the
Jack Sassauer starting his first day in the
I saw the
real
intern
world.
sign down in the.
Yeah.
So
it's real world
stuff. Wait a minute. You made a couple phone calls and you got your son an internship?
He's got a lot.
I wouldn't say I made a couple. There are people who have been eyeballing Jack Sassauer for a long, long time, since he was at least 11 years old, an up-and-comer, looking at his scores,
so
looking at his numbers.
He was 11 years old. And
they've been recruiting him pretty heavily, in AA.
University of Miami. God, what you wouldn't give for 4 years at the University of Miami.
What I wouldn't give for, I know.
Oh, my God.
At the Rochester Institute of Technology,
a little different.
We had the quarter mile, which is you walked into the western wind coming in from Buffalo. And the temperature would be 28.
Your eye ducts would freeze.
That would literally, your face would freeze.
Tom, these kids, between classes at the U, they stop by the pool and take a dip.
Oh, yeah. It's
literally
nuts.
between classes.
Literally. No, they got to go to a northern school like Duke or Vanderbilt.
They have the Mellon, the Thornton Mellon high dive there. It's really cool, actually. The triple Linding.
It's unbelievable.
Damien, good luck on the golf course today. Mr. Sassauer with an important
I need it.
brief there. Look to Asia with Bloomberg tonight. Their Tuesday morning. This will be really interesting to see how this unfolds as they look at a Macron-like 30 and 50-year debt to unload. Our John Micklethwaite in conversation with the gentleman of the French Republic. Look for that conversation with Macron later on today. At 10 o'clock-ish, we've got back-to-back Janet Yellen with Amory Horton and Jonathan Farrow in Paris in conversation with Mr. Solomon
John
of
Farrow in
Goldman
Paris. How did that
Sachs.
happen?
Well, he's got connections
Okay.
there.
All right.
He called me up. He said, like in Dior, do you turn right to the cosmetic counter or do you just go up the stairs to the dresses? I said, c'est bon.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures edging higher. Investors waiting key economic data out later this week could shed some light on the outlook for Fed policy. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.2%. Dow and S&P futures up 0.1%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.84%, down 2 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.48%, that's down 1 basis point. A few companies making news. Shares of Alphabet falling down 2%. Bloomberg reporting Apple closing in on an agreement to use OpenAI's technology on the iPhone. Then you have Chevron's proposed takeover of Hess. It's getting some pushback. Senator Chuck Schumer urging the FTC to pause that deal, saying that it's going to give the industry more power to raise gas prices. And finally, Squarespace set to go private in a nearly $7 billion all-cash transaction with global private equity firm Permira. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. The economic data, it's huge this week with a ginormous Wednesday. CPI retail sales at this moment And all of our economic data supported by Commonwealth. The economic indicators brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. I was waxing philosophical with a beverage of my choice in my hand.
That happens.
About the legs of a bull market, and the support and resistance dynamics are different in each leg of a bull market. And idiots, I didn't say that. Idiots that draw little lines pretending to be John Maggie, amateur, it's a good way to get in trouble. Here is the word now on support and resistance. Chris Verrone joins with Strategas. Is the support to this great bull market different than it was 2 Octobers ago?
Well, I think the support to this bull market is what has generally been very supportive leadership. I mean, look at the move we've seen in these global industrials. Industrials working. Industrials have the highest correlation to the market itself. So when industrials are working, the market's generally in pretty good hands. We still have that going for us here. And I think underappreciated, particularly the last 6-8 weeks as the markets come out of this oversold condition, are the financials. Bank stocks are breaking out, not just domestically, but look at the European banks. The Japanese banks have resumed the uptrend as well. So if you think about industrials and banks as important tenets of a bull market, I think this one is alive and well.
My metric is the Sweeney Dow 40,000. Then what does resistance look like? What is the character of resistance as we buttress up SPX, Dow, in NASDAQ 100?
Yeah, so 52.65, I think, is the high from late March on S&P. What's important for us, we wrote about it this morning, you still have 80% of the S&P above the 200-day moving average, so 8 out of 10 names are still trending. That's not where your big problems tend to emerge from. Your big problems tend to come about when the internal conditions are deteriorating, even as the market grinds higher. That is not the case here. If there's maybe one thing recently that's been on our radar that I think deserves perhaps a little bit of pause, consumer discretionary has started to soften here a little bit, and it's juxtaposed against the narrative of the consumer being very strong. So we're always kind of aware or alert to the price action, not necessarily agreeing with the consensus story. I think that's the one blemish, but otherwise it's a pretty good bull market.
Hey, Chris, I think most of our listeners, most of our viewers on YouTube, they've only known a market that's been led by tech. Can tech still lead this market higher the next leg up, or are you looking for other areas that you mentioned, financials and others?
I think at best here, tech is neutral in terms of its leadership bona fides at the moment. And that I think has been a little underappreciated the last 6 weeks as we kind of corrected and have started to come out of the correction. Tech really hasn't returned as the pronounced leadership of this move. Where else is it coming from? It's coming from materials, which globally look fantastic. We see the move in copper, the chemical stocks. So I don't think tech not leading to the same extent is ominous. I just think it's a reflection of some leadership rotation that's underway. I don't think that's something to fear, but people have a lot of tech on, and I might be a little bit more careful there and discretionary relative to some of the other leadership that's happening.
What do yield charts describe right now?
So I feel against the grain here, and I never like going to bed at night feeling I'm fighting against the tape. I don't mind fighting against the consensus. I don't like fighting the tape. I like bond yield lower here. I don't think I'm fighting the tape, but I do think I'm fighting the consensus. And I like yields lower because look at some of these global 10-year yields. UK 10s, German 10s, Swiss 10s, Italian 10s. They all point lower, not higher. So I'm having our team think about what would be the news flow over the next 6 months if we woke up and 10-year yields were 3.
Well, is it Wednesday at 8:30? Not to pitch a show, but tune in Wednesday at 8:30? CPI?
It doesn't seem like the bar is very high for yields to surprise on the upside here. That's our suspicion, particularly when we look at the global yields. When I go back 3 years ago, we were lucky to get the yield up call correct. And I think about why did we get it right? We got it right because all these global yields were telling us bonds everywhere were going to weaken and yields would rise. I think it's a bit of the opposite setup right here. And then you kind of compare that with, utilities outperforming a little bit better from consumer staples, the financials as we talked about. That doesn't sound like leadership where you would expect bond yields running away.
Hey, Chris, when we had that big move in the S&P 500 off of that October level here, 25% move, a lot of folks were saying, hey, we need to see a little bit of a pullback here. That would be healthy for a longer-term uptrend. Was that 4 or 5% pullback we had in April? Was that it, do you think?
I think it was it for
retrace a
now.
lot of it. Okay.
I mean, 48.50 was kind of the big breakout level from back earlier in the year. We retraced back to 49.50. I think we got close enough. All of our, what I would describe internal oversold conditions started to flash. We're at a minimum, when you're in an uptrend, don't get too cute about what level you're a buyer at, because the trend is up. And I still think those are the rules of the
That's where
game.
we are right now.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to go technical now. We can do this with Chris Verrone. Earl Blumenthal was one of my heroes. I never met him. He was a generation before me. But what he said was you could get catharsis as a constructive reaffirmation of a trend. And he had a double high pole top and a double high pole bottom. And the answer is a la NVIDIA. You're there, and then it's OMG, down you go, and then you come back. And that's a bottom. Are we seeing catharsis internally within the popular stocks of the day that will allow them to drive harder? Or are we in a zombie lethargy, as Lisa Mateo says we are?
I think we're in a little bit of a rotation away from the stocks that have driven this move for the first 14, 15 months off October 2022's low into something else. And I think you see that reflected in materials working, and industrials working, and financials working. I think this is less about tech and discretionary, which were kind of the early cycle moves. Now, are these things done? Is Google done? Is NVIDIA done? I don't think so. I just don't think they're returning as the same leadership coming out of this correction that they once were. And I think ultimately, to make the case that those stocks should be sold or that they're finished, you need to see bigger volatility. Systems break when vol gets too heavy or too big, and you don't have that yet with those names. We spent a lot of time in the last couple months going back and evaluating how all the big tech stocks of 99, how they peaked in 2000, and the one thing they all had in common was they ended on big volatility. It was 6 months where it was 3% up, 4% down, 5% up. We don't have that here yet.
But Paul, we don't have the dearth of cash flow that we had in 1999.
No, we've got real cash flow.
I look at the cash flow statements of these companies. None of the textbooks I studied have that.
No,
it's an original thing that we're dealing with right now.
I actually wonder, Tom, if that ultimately is going to be the psychological hurdle for people. If these stocks actually begin to weaken at some point down the line, they're going to fall too back on, oh, well, at least they have cash flow. At least they still earn.
I agree. Yeah.
And that's not dissimilar. The Nifty 50, as they peaked in 73, 74, they had earnings, they had revenue, they had cash flow. Just what the market was willing to pay for them changed. And that, I think, is ultimately the bigger question down the line.
Okay, what's your single best idea right now? All the charts you look at, Jason Trennan's sitting there with an Olivia in hand, and he says, what's the single best idea, Chris?
I think these breakouts in the global material charts are hands down the best thing in our work. I think it's a reflection of an improving China. We were early there.
So you're long copper.
I'm long copper. I'm long Chinese equities. Put my foot on the pedal there.
Very good. Chris Verrone, outstanding. Strategas. So I can't say enough about this, folks. There's two kinds of technical analysis, trend-based and stochastic. And Chris Verrone and I have sampled the Kool-Aid at the trend-based line. That's the technical analysis we do. Futures up 12. With our news in New York City, John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. Anthony Blinken delivering some of the strongest U.S. public criticism yet of Israel's conduct in Gaza. The Secretary of State says that Israeli tactics have meant a horrible loss of life of innocent civilians, but have failed to neutralize Hamas leaders.
Israel's on the trajectory potentially to inherit an insurgency with many armed Hamas left, or if it leaves, a vacuum filled by chaos, filled by anarchy, and probably refilled by Hamas.
Secretary Blinken speaking on Face the Nation from CBS, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. Over the weekend, anti-war protesters disrupted several college graduation ceremonies. A number of graduates at Duke walked out of Jerry Seinfeld's commencement speech in protest of the comedian's support of Israel. Social media posts and videos show some students chanting Free Palestine as they left the ceremony. There was no noticeable disturbance to Seinfeld's speech.
Go get him, Duke class of 24. Throw the hat up. Let's get out of here. Congratulations.
And last night, protesters clashed with police outside of graduation at Pomona College in Los Angeles. The ceremony had already been relocated due to security concerns. And demolition of the last remaining span of the Francis Scott Key Bridge scheduled for today. Officials in Baltimore say lightning prevented demolition that was scheduled for yesterday. They estimate the section that will be blown apart weighs between 3,000 and 4,000 tons. The goal is to have that entire channel leading in and out of the Port of Baltimore reopened by the end of this month. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Bloomberg surveillance and all that we do. It's brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with their next generation trading platform. IBKR Desktop. IBKR Desktop download. IBKR Desktop at ibkr.com/desktop. Paul, I'm trying to imagine, it's not me, I'm not in this position, parents who have ponied up a lot of money, cash, loans, whatever. Yep. Everybody's got their own story of the education fiasco in this country, and you go to a graduation that doesn't have the cadence of another time and place.
Yeah, and you think about some, just the thought of canceling a graduation, given what some of these kids have had to deal with COVID and missing high school graduation.
Absolutely, yes.
Is just unthinkable to me, but that's just me. But
my ceremony is tomorrow.
There you go, Rutgers.
The young one.
Sanjay, the State University of New Jersey.
The Jersey Mike's Arena. I had no idea they sponsored it.
Jersey Mike's Arena.
Jersey Mike's from Manasquan, New Jersey.
That's
and there
right.
is in Manasquan, New Jersey, there is a building there where they teach people how to make the subs.
Is there really?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You had to learn that?
I knew it was Manasquan. I didn't know that.
I don't know.
Okay.
But that's why Jersey Mike's is the best.
Is John Bon Jovi giving the commencement address?
Well, the John Bon Jovi rest stop is
That's
been
been
completely
closed.
shut down.
Yeah.
They're renovating the whole thing, John. They're bringing it
Yes,
really
they ripped up the parking lot. Now, typically in New Jersey, you have to be dead before you get a rest area named for you, like Vince Lombardi and, you know.
Okay, yeah.
But no, the one on the Parkway has been closed. And if I were Bon Jovi, I'd be very upset.
But it's good. They're going to make it the state-of-the-art New Jersey rest stop on the Parkway.
I watched some of his video. I think it's
What
it's
qualifies
on Hulu
as a
and
state
Netflix.
of the art?
I watched some of the Bon Jovi video, and it's just really, really interesting. You can tell that
like a documentary.
he and them, they're just still in shock. This happened over 40 years.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Classic 1980s like hair.
How many times have you seen Bon Jovi?
I've seen him 3 times. I'm not a crazy Bon Jovi fan, but I
But
definitely
you-
it's a phenomenal show.
You saw early Bon Jovi,
I saw early
middle Bon Jovi,
yeah.
and no Sambora Bon Jovi.
No, I haven't seen it without him, which I wouldn't go see it without Richie Sambora.
I see him taking out his trash.
That's nice.
Just down the street.
I had the posters hanging up in my room back in
You
high
said
school.
you had The Rock, you had John Bon Jovi.
I'm telling you, Kirk
We say
Cameron.
congratulations to the
Cameron?
extended
Oh my
Tucker
God.
clan as they celebrate another offspring out. Does he have a job?
Yeah, delivering liquor right now at the liquor store. But
The family business.
it could be as good as it gets.
Stay with us if you dare. From New York City on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures advancing, all eyes narrowing in on U.S. producer prices due Tuesday ahead of April's inflation print the next day, along with retail sales. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, Dow futures, S&P futures up 0.2%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.84%, down 2 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.47%, down 2 basis points. Over to commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,346 an ounce. Brent crude, $83 a barrel. We have NYMEX crude, $78 a barrel. Over to Bitcoin, up 2% at $62,778. What's moving the markets? That's GameStop, surging like the mania in 2021, up 38%. This is after a cryptic post on X by Roaring Kitty, who became popular. Yes,
Citigroup put a bomb.
That's what, or that, yes. And then we have some news from Intel, up 1%. Wall Street Journal reporting it's in advanced talks for a deal where Apollo will provide more than $11 billion to help the company build a plant over in Ireland. And finally, Microsoft up 1%. Report from the Financial Times says the company is set to face new antitrust charges in the EU over its video conferencing app, Teams. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much. Ian Bremmer, Lisa Mateo, thank you. Ian Bremmer is doing the commencement speech this week at Columbia SIPA, which is a really important effort in international relations. And it talks about a holistic need in finance to have a broad perspective. And in this case, from Columbia Business School and also Columbia SIPA. Driving the ship, and truly the new Citigroup, Jason Rekate joins us right now, Global Head of Corporate Banking for all of Citigroup. And this after a tour of duty, including being in Tokyo as early as January as well. You have the heritage and pedigree of your company. John Reed would say, this is a guy we built. What's the new Citigroup look like in corporate banking?
Love the question. I think the short answer is it's not changed from that perspective. We have retained the most important element of our DNA in this gigantic reorganization, which is our globality, our reach, our ability to serve multinational companies across the world.
And Jason, I know you did your tour in Japan. I did my Salomon Brothers tour there back in the very early 90s. Then it fell off the map. We haven't talked about Japan for like 25 years. Why are we now talking about Japan?
Japan is back. It's fantastic right now.
Why is it back? How is it back?
Well, I think Japan's been doing the hard yards for many years. In this long period of deflation, of sort of a stagnant economy, which didn't feel great, the Japanese companies, the banks, the multinationals were continuing to press forward with investment, with reshaping the economy, knowing they had some demographic issues they're going to have to sort out. The outbound investment from Japan became more and more fundamental to their sort of overall strategy as a country. I think what's happened is the world has caught up and figured it out. I mean, there's some important developments there. I think one thing that really helped, honestly, was in terms of just bringing attention to Japan and the market there was Warren Buffett's investment in the 5 trading companies. It just made people say, what exactly are those companies and why are they interesting? We've known about them for years. We've been banks to them for 50 years.
I know. Citi, you guys have been, but it's just amazing. All right, head of corporate banking at Citi. That is it, man. Are you guys making loans? Are your customers, do they need capital? Are you guys making loans?
What our customers need is everything. I mean, lending is an important part of it, and that's what we use to sort of cement and create the foundation of those relationships. But what we do as a firm goes way beyond that. And what we do in corporate banking is try to make sure we deliver the entire firm, a big global enterprise, to them. So they need risk management tools, they need cash management, they need advisory, they need access to capital markets, and that's what we want to make sure that we deliver it wherever they need it, whatever currency they need, whatever sort of risk exposure they've got.
I've got to talk to you about the new Citigroup, which I just think is so important, because those of us weaned on John Reed and Walter Wriston and the rest, I'm sorry, it's a bank that's lost its way. A woman from Scotland and the United Kingdom has come in and raised hell, and Jane Fraser. The new Citigroup, what is its global distinction when it knocks on the door of the many different kinds of corporate clients you have?
It's not a hard discussion to have with clients because they know us already. They know what we do. I think what our clients were looking for is to make sure, this is the discussion I've had with lots of them, how are you different, how are you the same? And the question is, the things we've done have been very internally focused at making sure we're simpler, we're easier to operate, and that we've removed some areas of bureaucry that we're not
are
adding.
you the boutique of the major banks? Is that what this is really coming down to?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, some of the things we do for our clients are things that no other bank can do. We operate in more countries. We have the biggest cash management network. We're participating in every corner of the capital market. So not just the easy stuff, not just the G3 currencies, but all of the exotics, all the emerging markets.
So then explain your Saudi Arabian relationship that was fractious for years. Explain the new Citigroup into Saudi Arabia, or the new Citigroup into Mexico where retail walked away years ago. Explain the strategic corporate banking effort in some of these countries.
It's incredibly important to look at both Saudi and the rest of the region there, because the capital formation coming out of Saudi, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, what's happening there is critical, because what we see on these companies, these countries and the companies that exist in them, is an ability to export capital and technology and know-how. We're seeing some of the most important investments in things like renewable energy coming from that region. So from our perspective, helping those companies and those countries move outside of their home markets is really important.
Paul, jump in here, but the next time you're in Dubai, you need a long conversation with Jumana Bertet. She's over there holding court. Now, he needs to get in front of Jumana.
Love to do it. Plugged in there. Jason, I'd love to get your thoughts on, and Citi's thoughts on India, because a lot of folks are pitching that to us as everything you knew about China for the last 20, 25 years, put it to India for the next 20 to 25 years, maybe even with obviously a more friendly government. How do you guys think about it? You've been there since ever.
I try not to be overly bullish. I'm a guy who lends money, and so I have to be balanced in how I think about it. But I was there about a month ago. I go to India once or twice a year, and I've been doing that for over 10 years. I've never seen a more constructive investment environment than I've seen in this past year in India. What's happening there is extraordinary. There's going to be a massive super cycle, I think, coming out of after this election wraps up. It doesn't seem like it's going to be very dramatic in terms of the outcome. We all kind of know Prime Minister Modi will continue what he's planning to do in terms of investment in this country to make it competitive and get to his 2047 goal of becoming a developed country is incredible. The 500 gigawatts of new power, a rail system, a road system, airports that can't be beat. And you're feeling it already. My last trip there, new tunnels, new roads, shovel-ready projects that are starting to kick off. It's really interesting.
Walt Wriston 101, call on the utilities of America. They're having a renaissance now because they got to build out for AI.
Yeah.
What do you see there, from a granular standpoint? What does your team see of investment in electricity in America?
That's the critical thing. AI, also the support for renewable fuels and synthetic fuels, all of that, plus the EV kind of revolution, the amount of power that we're all going to need, not just the U.S. but globally, is extraordinary. I think we have to take an all of the above approach to this. What's going to happen is we're going to continue to push all of the renewable options. But given what we think is happening in AI and the requirement for data centers, it's going to go way beyond that. We need to make sure. My view is it's going to require nuclear. It's going to require, and there's going to be a significant period of transition where we're going to continue to use things like gas-fired power to get to those levels, because what we're seeing in the U.S. very specifically, but also everywhere else. India, Brazil, China. I mean, everybody's going to be building out massive data centers.
The French led on this. John Micklethwait with Macron. Very quickly here, you're saying we're going to see a nuclear energy build-out across America like what France owns?
I don't think it'll be quite as. I don't think nuclear will be as big a part of the solution for the U.S., but there's going to be more than we've had before. But France has gone sort of all in. That's going to be their long-term solution.
Jason Rekate, thank you so much. With Citigroup, head of all of their corporate banking. Are you based in New York?
Based in New York, yeah.
Worst elevators in global Wall Street.
Yeah, can you do an infrastructure investment on the elevators? Jason, thank you.
You got it. Thank you
so much. Greatly appreciate that. Moments ago, we learned at 9:30 today a briefing on Mr. Putin's weekend. Alex Bordeaux joining us from Eurasia Group. We'll do that in about 30 minutes. Thanks to our team for that. That's really, really important. It's Stevie Wonder's birthday. I had the honor of seeing him once from a very short distance play. It is all real. It is shocking, the talent. Happy birthday, Mr. Wonder.
Not like it's hurt me before. Not like it's hurt before. Once I have something I know won't desert me, I'm not alone anymore. I'm not alone anymore. Once I can see this is mine, you can't take it. As long as I know I have love, I can make it. For once in my life, I have someone who needs me. Someone who needs me.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo with us, Michael Barr on assignment. Good morning, everyone. On a Monday, it's not like I'm exhausted already, but the market dynamics, as Amanda Lyman said, the nuances that are out there right now are just flat out extraordinary. We were talking to Kit Jukes, Euro Yen, with Jason Rekate there of Citigroup. Euro Yen, 168, a 169 print would be really of note. Renminbi holds on here with their new bond program. Thank you, Damian Sassower, for wisdom on that. Brett not giving me much of a story today, but really what I got is I got the Sweeney lift in equities. What'd you learn from Chris Verrone, Paul?
I mean, I think he's got some upward
He's
bias.
long.
The technicals are supporting his call here, so he's pretty bullish here.
He's long. He ended his conversation by saying materials is the place to be, not plastics, but copper and the rest of it. Thank you to Chris Verrone of Strategas Research as well. We're going to talk equities here in a moment. Well, the whole thing has just been spectacular. Moments ago, we're learning we will speak to a representative for Eurasia Group in Europe on Mr. Putin's announcements over the weekend. Maybe it's a bit off the radar, but hugely important in international relations. Futures up 13, Dow futures up 88. Look to Apple CarPlay and Android Play on the radio. It's our new digital platform. It's free. It's free. It's free.
John Tucker.
And and out on YouTube, search Bloomberg Podcasts, and also go to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube, and you'll find us there with an important live chat. Bloomberg Surveillance this hour brought to you by BNY Mellon Insight. Let me spell that, INSITE. BNY Mellon Insight, June 4th, June 6th in Nashville.
I'll be there.
Don't miss the essential event for the financial advice community. Visit insight.bnymellon.com.
Alex Steele and I will be there.
I saw an Apple
They have
TV.
a water park there to die for.
Yeah, they had Casey Musgraves on Apple TV, and it was lights out. She's an electric lady here in New York.
Nice.
And because of that, you're going down to Nashville?
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to take Alex to the Grand Ole Opry. We'll do a little Cracker Barrel
I
for
can't
breakfast.
see you at a water park, though.
Oh,
What's the
and
water
the water
park?
parks can be big.
Really?
Oh, it's Opryland. I helped finance that thing back in the 90s.
There you go.
Pancake Pantry.
Yep.
There's the old one, which was smaller, and then they expanded. It's really not the same, but pancake. Pancakes.
Who doesn't love a good pancake?
You know, it's like where the elite meet the Greek. We say good morning to all of you with the Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And futures are advancing. Investors kind of zeroing in on more economic data out this week, including CPI, retail sales. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, Dow futures, S&P futures up 0.2%. To the bond market, we have the 2-year yield at 4.83%, down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.47%. Down 2 basis points. Some news out of the annual Choose France Summit. Emmanuel Macron unveiled more than $16 billion foreign investments from Amazon, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley that he says will help spark France's economy. Then shares of Alphabet, they're falling. They're down 2%. Bloomberg reporting Apple closing in on an agreement to use OpenAI's technology on the iPhone. Apple up more than 1%. And finally, Squarespace set to go private in a nearly $7 billion all-cash transaction with global private equity firm Permira. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. You don't want to buy NVIDIA. You don't want to buy Apple. What are you going to do? Lori Calvasina joins now with RBC Capital Markets. Do you ascribe to the idea, Lori, that the market's lifting even away from the ginormous tech companies?
Sure. So, look, I think that I wasn't totally convinced the 5% pullback we did was enough, but we'll see. I do think, though, that we've got some strong economic tailwinds in place. And I do think that sort of supports the idea of rotation away from the Mag 7, the large cap growth trade. So we've actually, I think similar to what one of your earlier guests said, we've been telling people to look at things like materials, energy, financials, and also utilities, which have had a nice move recently.
Lori, we're pretty much through the earnings here. We're going to get some retailers this week, of course, including Walmart and some others. What's your takeaway from earnings here? Did corporate America kind of earn their way into the multiple, do you think?
So look, I think that reporting season was fine. It wasn't anything to get too excited about either way. I think if you go through and you look at the beats on both earnings and revenues, we saw very strong rates of earnings beats. They were less strong on sales. And we've seen that for a while now. But what that's telling me is that corporate America is finding a way to get it done. And we should applaud them for that. But we should also recognize that they are finding a way to get it done. And they're really navigating through a tough cost environment. So I think the numbers are good. We've seen the consensus estimate for S&P this year go up to 245 again. That's basically where we were last summer. Usually that bottom-up consensus is in the right neighborhood by the time we get through this reporting season and into June. So I think that we've managed to go through it without too much damage. And there were a lot of bears who were saying the numbers were crazily too high, needed to come down, that was going to destroy the market. Well, that didn't happen.
Hey, Lori, I know you and your team, you really go through the earnings transcripts to kind of get a sense of what corporate management teams are focused on these days. What did you take away from the most recent round of earnings?
It was an interesting exercise. It always is. We've been doing this for a few years now. I would say, one of my main thoughts as we've got these big inflation prints coming out this week is that while companies, certainly weren't saying that the cost environment was good, it was a pretty balanced discussion. So we had some companies saying, well, costs are elevated. Others were saying, well, input costs have come down, or things are normalizing, or things are moderating, or we're maybe calling out something like freight expense that had gotten a little bit easier. That really contrasts with what we heard in the last reporting season in January through March, when it was almost very uniformly a kind of hot inflation commentary, if you will, where it was just nothing but negative, negative, negative. So that makes me feel a little bit better heading into these prints. I'm still a little bit nervous, that the economists, haven't figured out what they got wrong in the first quarter. But admittedly, the company commentary has been a little bit better on that point.
So, all right. So given the fact that we've got yields pulling back just a little bit here, from a sector perspective, Lori, where do you think the best opportunities are right here?
Well, I think that when you're in one of these environments, right, where the macro cross currents, right, and the narratives, it feels like they're just whiplashing, right? It feels like they change every few weeks. I think you want to really stay focused on things like valuation, things like earnings revision momentum, and where you're starting to see, more frankly, upside revisions to analyst estimates than other sectors. And a couple of sectors that really jump out to me are both energy and financials. We've got very strong valuation stories in both. The earnings revisions are improving in both. And while materials isn't quite as strong on the earnings revision front, we still really like the valuations there. And I think when you're getting whiplashed by all these narratives, you really just want to stay focused on the data.
While Paul's been going on here with you, it's been really, really interesting. I'm looking at the materials sector, and I'm as guilty as anyone, Lori Calvasina, of having tech on the brain. Lind of Danbury, Connecticut, Dow Chemical, and others. Sherwin-Williams. Materials, how quaint, Paul.
I know.
It's from my youth when Lori was like in third grade.
It went back when she was on the lawn at UVA. Lori, talk to us about valuation here. The stock market, the S&P 500, let's just look at the S&P 500. It's had a big move off of those October levels. Has the valuation gotten in front of it? Do I need to strip out some of the handful of the big tech names and then get more comfortable with valuations in these markets? How do you think about that?
So we think about it in a couple different ways. There's forward PEs and trailing PEs. So let's look at forward PEs for just a moment, which is what most people's preferred gauge is. Not mine, actually, but what most people like to look at. And if you do that for the broader market, to be honest, I haven't looked at it for the S&P in a little while, so I don't know exactly what that number is, but we watch every week the top 10 names in the S&P versus the rest of the market. And what you see on the top 10 names is we're right back up to 27 times again. It got as low as 25 times recently. If you just look at a median PE of that bucket, it's way above average. It's bumping up against recent highs. You can get really scared in a hurry if you look at that stat. If you look at the rest of the market, we're trading around 16 times. So it's a little above average, nowhere near past peaks. And it looks to me, when you see those charts side by side, like there's a catch-up trade that needs to happen. You see this off recoveries. One thing typically runs harder off the bottom, then at some point it digests and pauses and the other thing catches up. And I think that's where we are for the rest of the market. And by the way, if you ask your typical buy-sider where they think the market should be trading at, they'll tell you 15, 16 times on forward earnings. And that's exactly where the broad market is, if you strip out those top 10 names.
Lori, thank you. Lori Calvasina with us, head of U.S. equity strategy here, RBC Capital Markets, trying to get us away from NVIDIA on the brain. Not that any of us would be guilty of that. The VIX 13.31, Dow On the Sweeney watch, up 117 points. The Dow here in futures, 39,758. With our news in New York City, here's John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. Anthony Blinken says Israel risks fueling Hamas insurgency in post-war Gaza. The Secretary of State says there will be thousands of armed militants in the area, even if Israel invades the city of Rafah. Blinken is concerned about Israel's conduct of the Gaza offensive.
We've been working for many weeks on developing credible plans for security, for governance, for rebuilding. We haven't seen that come from Israel. We've been working with Arab countries and others on that plan.
Well, Secretary Blinken speaking on Face the Nation from CBS, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. The testimony resumes today in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial in New York, and Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more on what to expect this week.
Prosecutors say they only expect to call 2 more witnesses, and they say they could rest their case by the end of the week. Former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen is set to testify today about his role in arranging a $130,000 payment in 2016 to adult film actor Stormy Daniels. Prosecutors had not planned to call former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg to the stand. He's currently serving a 5-month sentence for lying under oath. But on Friday, Judge Juan Merchan encouraged prosecutors to at least try to get Weisselberg to court instead of introducing evidence to explain his absence. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Amy. Thousands of residents from a Canadian town being urged to evacuate. That's because a fast-growing wildfire has resulted in poor air quality and reduced visibility. Wildfire maps show the fire burning just a few miles west of Fort Nelson city limits on the west coast, where about 3,000 people live. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, and Lisa.
John, thanks so much. Paul, Sweeney, we started off the hour talking about media and the experiences we're all having at home on this. And then you got to invest in this stuff. And I'm looking at Warner Brothers Media, which to me is the greatest challenge. And I mean, as a generalization, it can't find a bid critically at $8.15, about there now. It's below where it was the end of 2022. I mean, time is of the essence. Is that like close?
Yeah, and Tom, and you have to look at the balance sheet just to start. They have $40 billion of debt, and they've got maybe
they're paying some down.
And if they're they paid down about $10 billion in debt in the last 2 years, and they've got $10 billion of cash flow. So that's 4 times leverage. That's higher than the market would like to see them. So they've got the operating issues of, hey, where are all my customers going with this cord cutting thing, and where's my revenue going? And at the same time, I have to pay down.
Okay,
the debt
explain
on my
this
balance
in the real world. Barrington, this is off the fly. I haven't read the report. They still have an outperform on Warner Brothers doing a double, but they take the price target down from 18 to 15.
Yep.
It's at 8 right now.
Yep.
So they had it with a legit double, and they come in a little bit below that. I mean, people are right-sizing this thing a different way.
It is. And, at the end of the day, you like to think there's asset value there, Tom, but just take a look at Paramount. Paramount is up for sale, and there are no bids. For the Paramount movie studio, the cable networks, no bids.
Did you see Planet of the Apes?
I did not.
The new one?
No.
It's out there. Lisa's taking the whole
56 or 59 million in box office.
It's like huge.
Family went.
Planet of the Apes 14. It's like they show Sydney again, like with Charlton Heston. Futures up 17. Dow futures up 117 as well. These are the futures. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got green on the screen. S&P, Dow, and NASDAQ futures all up 0.3%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.83%, down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.47%, down 2 basis points. Over to commodities, we have spot gold lower, $2,348 an ounce. Brent crude, $83 a barrel. NYMEX crude, $78 a barrel. What's moving the markets? That would be GameStop, soaring up more than 40%. Roaring Kitty returns to social media, adding some fuel to the fire. Then you have Chevron's proposed takeover of Hess getting some pushback. Senator Chuck Schumer actually urging the FTC kind of to stop that because he's saying that it could, affect gas prices. So that's his concern there. And then moving on, we also have news from graduation season. We've been talking about it. John Tucker mentioned his son. So Wallet Hub says the best place to start a career, Atlanta. Orlando came in second. Salt Lake City came in third. The worst place to start a career, New York City. That is your Bloomberg and your house. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks so much. We need to go back to John Tucker here and talk about the employment. I mean, it's very rare that most kids slide out of college fully employed. Let's discuss the working day for the offspring.
Well, weekends you deliver liquor using my car, by the way. Wait, is the insurance company listening to this?
Insurance, yeah.
Gorgieva's people called me up at the IMF and said this kid's bringing in so many tips, it's changing the balance of payments.
They tip. I mean, it's and when they're like Super Bowl weekend or whatever, you can make a pretty good.
It's a big deal.
And of course, he reports all that.
Yeah, that's good. That's your college update.
That's
there, folks. We'll have much more for you. Cash flow got out of school, and I'm like, go get a job. Go get a job.
Yeah.
Go get a job. Dad, I got a job. Shanghai,
Do you
China.
kick them out of the house, Lisa? Do you kick them out of the house at some point?
I do.
No, still staying in the house. Yep.
Henrietta Trays is taking notes here. Someday this is going to be her. Joining us right now, Henrietta Trays with Veda Partners. What we're going to do is some good international relations and politics here for the next half hour. Henrietta, I'm going to cut to the chase. The New York Times poll says these swing states are critical for Joe Biden. Tell me in your textbooks where 100% tariff on any product, and including an EV car from China, is efficacious.
Well, in this case, there's not a lot of actual full cars that are coming in from China in the first place. So this is more of a big bang headline component. Even Senator Brown has called for just an outright ban, not even 100% tariff, which is what the president is prepared to announce tomorrow. I think the real piece that you're looking at is stopping electric vehicle threat and emerging technology, emerging economy threat from China holistically, which has been the Biden administration's sort of concerted effort for the last several years. And we're going to see that not just in the vehicles that they put the 100% tariff on, but I'm more interested in seeing what tariff rate they put on the specific components that go into the Chinese vehicles, into the electric vehicles. So that'll be the batteries, cobalt, lithium, et cetera, the various pieces and what those tariffs end up at. And of course, we're keep all the existing tariffs on China as well, is my understanding. So this is just, ramping up that escalation we've seen for the entire administration from Biden.
Okay, but it's all about domestic politics. I mean, do you see a dialogue of economic rationality to our trade policy, to thinking forward 1 year, Paul, dare I say 3 years out? Baloney, this is all about the first Tuesday in November, right, Henrietta?
A big portion of this is undoubtedly about the first Tuesday in November. You're looking at, something like 83 different electoral college votes could come from this. And that includes Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, even North Carolina and Georgia, where these huge manufacturing components are. And it's really, it's not even fair to just say that it's these tariffs. The entire Inflation Reduction Act was billions of dollars, and which have really even risen further since they passed that bill, to create domestic subsidization of these industries that goes straight to the Teamsters unions, straight to the auto workers unions. And what you see from those different groups that are core voting blocks in those Rust Belt states that Biden's going to need to win the election in November is an incredible lobbying group where they're already writing letters. They're already saying thank you. They're already saying we'd really like to see these tariffs or bans go into effect. And I think that's the next step that you'll see after the president and Ambassador Tai roll this out on Tuesday. So it's undoubtedly related.
So, Henrietta, the Inflation Reduction Act, that is a signature piece of legislation for the Biden administration. Where are we in putting dollars to work, number one? And number two, is he getting credit for this?
That bill was rolled out in December of 2022, and just now you're starting to see investor attention to the spending, and that's going to translate to job creation and all the rest, because it's taken almost a year to get the staff at Treasury, the staff at those federal agencies to write some of the regulations around emission standards, about who qualifies for the manufacturing deduction tax credits, the solar, the hydrogen, et cetera. I mean, it has taken forever to actually get enough folks who are familiar enough with tax policy and clean energy and sort of emerging tech policy to get these credits developed in the first place. But now they're out and they are rolling out the door, and the cost estimate has exploded. I mean, it's hundreds of billions of dollars more than what they originally expected. And that's a dual from, the private sector uptake, the qualifications. I mean, corporations are shoveling in this money, and I think that's going to eventually translate. But no, I mean, Biden is stuck in the mud on polling, as we saw the latest from the New York Times Siena polls this morning.
Right.
It's taken forever to seep in.
What do you think, Henrietta? I'm going to give you this phrase and translate it into 2024. Ticket splitting. In the old days, grandparents would go, and great-grandparents, they'd hold me in their arms while they did the little thing in the voting booth, and they'd vote straight Republican or straight Democrat.
Yep.
Are we a ticket-splitting America now, Henrietta Trace?
Well, that's what the polling is telling you, but that is not what we do in reality. In 2016, not a single senator was sent to D.C. from a state that elected a different president. Not one. In 2020, there was only one, and that was Susan Collins. We all know, a very moderate long-term incumbent in Maine. Before that, way back to 2012, we used to get 7, 8 different senators sent from a different party. And there used to be a ton of ticket splitting, but that has dropped off precipitously to the point where it's almost non-existent. So one of the things that's concerned me all year, we've talked about it before in your program, it makes no sense to me to see that there is ticket splitting in every single one of the 7 or 8 different swing states in the Senate, from Michigan, Ohio, where Sherrod Brown is ahead 2 points and Donald Trump is up by 12. That suggests a level of ticket splitting, and what I refer to with clients all the time, just the delta between the Dem and the Senate polling so far and away from Biden at the top of the ticket is nonsensical. And a big portion of that, quite frankly, I think is the third party candidate ticket splitting that's taking RFK's vote, which mostly comes from Biden. Now, I don't mean that to say that when RFK voters get off the line and they decide they're going to vote for either Biden or Trump, which they will eventually do, come October, they're going to start to migrate to one of the other candidates. They used to go for Biden. In 2020, they were for Biden. So if you look at the broader data, Trump polls at exactly the same levels he was polling at in 2020. It's Biden who's materially underwater, and that accounts for the entire difference between the Dems in the Senate and Biden at the top of the ticket. So that's got to come in, or Biden will lose.
Absolutely brilliant and world-class. Henrietta Trace, thank you so much. Veda Partners. She's one of the guests where I should be taking notes.
I know, every single time.
It's just amazing, that walkthrough on ticket splitting. That was really informative. We got to get the markets open. Paul, what's your one insight off of like the weekend, my head-spinning weekend of what to do with the markets and what we observe on the Bloomberg screen right now?
I'm going to follow earnings, Tom. I know the Fed's all the rage here. I'm going to follow earnings, and I think we had a pretty good earnings season. I think once again we had cautious optimism looking forward. I'm going to be paying attention to the retailers this week, Tom, because that'll, Walmart's of the world will give you a good sense of really where the consumer is these days.
The real yield, 10-year real yield in 2 basis points, 2.12%. The angst is about 2.18, so that's in a little bit better as well. Futures up 16, they advance pretty much highs for the day. Dow futures up 104 and the VIX 13.28. Got lots more coming up again later this morning. Yellen, Solomon of Goldman Sachs, and Macron. from New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
A day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Now, not much economic data on tap for today, but tomorrow things kick in. We have PPI, then on Wednesday, CPI and retail sales. Bloomberg Economics says April's consumer price index could be a little better or at least no worse than March. And U.S. retail sales probably moderated in April. But how are investors feeling ahead of all this? Let's get to the markets right now as we start to turn them on. S&P 500 up 0.2%. The Dow, that's up about 0.3%. Same for the Nasdaq, now up 0.3%. There you go. Over to the 2-year yield in the bond market, the 4.83%, down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.46. 0.6%. That's down 3 basis points. Checking in with commodities, we have spot gold lower 2,345 an ounce. Brent crude $83 a barrel. WTI crude at $78 a barrel. At the open, have to check in with GameStop up 46%. Yeah, Roaring Kitty returns to social media with a cryptic post on X, and that's sparking those shares. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Over the weekend, there was what experts would call a stunning set of announcements out of Moscow. Of course, Mr. Putin, I guess winning election is one way to put it, and starting another term, another era of his many, many decades of influence in Russia. We get a brief from Alex Brideau. He's at Eurasia Group and really quite expert for Ian Bremmer and the team here on what's going on at the Kremlin. Alex, describe how Mr. Putin prosecutes the war day to day. I have real trouble with the media phrase, the Kremlin. There's a number of buildings around the Kremlin. And is he micromanaging the Ukraine war with his new Secretary of Defense, or is he removed from those decisions?
Well, I think that he is still very much involved in what's going on with the prosecution of the war. Now, the general staff in the military is going to be the one that's really driving the strategy. And there have been reports in the past, over the last 2 years, that occasionally Putin has stepped in and micromanaged to a degree, but it is going to be the military that's going to have sort of the day-to-day functioning on their mind of what's going on. The new Minister of Defense, I think, is going to be more of a manager of defense procurement, of the defense budget, of trying to sort of clean up some of the mismanagement that's going to be the outgoing Minister Shoigu is going to be blamed for. The
new defense minister, to me, almost harkened back to the appointment of Robert McNamara for JFK, where you go, well, heaven forbid, it's not somebody with a military background. Okay. It's somebody who's an economist or a McKinsey type, you name it, or that. It's how unusual is it for them to have almost a U.S. model of a non-military type running defense?
Well, civilian defense ministers have been in that position in the past in Russia, so that's been changing over time, and I think it's probably going to be more common going forward, especially because I think for running the Ministry of Defense, a lot of this is going to be about defense procurement. How do you get the tanks and the armor, the other things that Russian forces are required to have for conducting these offensives? And there are problems in some of these areas, and so I think the new minister Belousov, that's going to be a big part of his overall job in this role.
Hey, Alex, can you give us a sense here of how strong the position of Mr. Putin is within Russia, given that we're into this war for a prolonged period of time? It's probably not anything that he or his leadership group signed up for initially. How is his support within Russia? Is that even a debate point anymore?
At the moment, it's not really. I think, I think coming out of this election, what Putin wanted to show with the number, the 87% number of his victory, whether that was real or not, but what the signal that he was sending to the Russian public is that status quo going forward, this is the way in which the war is going to be prosecuted. He's not making substantial changes. So even as we're seeing some of these cabinet shuffles with some new people sort of being transferred around, I think the message there is kind of similar, that the overarching sort of structure of Putin's government, the overarching policies are going to be very similar. It's more about trying to fine-tune things. You have someone coming into the defense ministry with this economic policy background. The economic team has been very important to Putin in being able to prosecute this war over the last 2 years in the face of the sanctions that the U.S. and the EU and others have been imposing. So I think we're looking at sort of technocratic fixes going on here.
I think of Robin Brooks, but there's many others out on Twitter saying the sanctions are baloney, that they've been expert at avoiding the sanctions, going around them, doing different paths, whether through Uzbekistan, this stand, or the other stands. How effective have the sanctions been, Alex Brideau?
I think that they've been very mixed in terms of their overall results. Some of the effects, I think, are not going to be felt for years. Things that are designed to try and curb Russian revenues from oil and gas and LNG production. Those are going to play out over a much longer time frame. But what they have not been able to do is completely blunt Russia's ability to put forces in the field and to take additional territory, as we've been seeing just over this past weekend. I think the U.S. and the EU are going to focus still aggressively on trying to limit that sanctions evasion that the Russians are conducting. And so I think you've seen a lot of outreach, and a lot of tension between the U.S. and China over this issue. And I think that's probably going to continue, where there's going to be pressure coming from Washington, whether we're talking about China, Kazakhstan, countries in the South Caucasus, to limit what the Russians are able to do to evade the sanctions regime.
So, Alex, one of the goals, presumably for Mr. Putin at the beginning of this Ukraine offensive, was to weaken NATO. And in fact, the exact opposite has happened. How is that being perceived within Russia? And do they care?
Well, I think that the perception that Russia is in a struggle with the broader West and with NATO specifically has become a more important political point within Russia. I think Putin's going to continue to emphasize it. He did it during the campaign, and I didn't necessarily expect that he would, but I think he sees this as being a critical part of his political message now to the Russian public. I think the majority has absorbed this idea to varying degrees, and that they are kind of expecting that this is going to be a long-term struggle with the West. And I think that it doesn't depend necessarily on whether Biden wins re-election or whether Trump is elected in the U.S. I think there's still going to be a perception that there is this existential threat coming from the outside, and Putin is going to perpetuate that message with
Alex,
the Russian public.
Does the average Russian feel like there's an existential problem with the West? Wasn't it just 10, 15 years ago that we were having exchange students and Billy Joel's playing over there? And does the average Russian feel like there's an existential problem with the West, or is this just Putin?
Well, I think it's primarily Putin, but I think that for much of the public, I think there are members of the public who are going to perceive that Western support for Ukraine is a direct attack against Russia. And in part, that's because the Kremlin is really sending that message out. And the majority of the public is still getting a lot of their media from state TV and radio. They're not necessarily seeing some of the internet chatter that's happening. And I think that that's important for Putin's messaging. And I think that allows him to continue to perpetuate that message with the public.
Alex, thank you. On short notice, Alex Bordeaux with a great brief from Eurasia Group on the news over the weekend, the changing of the guard at the Kremlin. Paul, I don't even know where to go here with the Dow up 69, VIX up 0.2%, NASDAQ does better. GameStop trading halted.
Yes, again.
Up 54%.
That might be Tucker in there.
I think it's Lisa and her kids. 17.
Okay, very good.
Basically 17 to 26.
Stocks
trading
are 54%.
halted.
Yep. And so, I mean, this is where we were back in 2021, I think. It was kind of when these stocks were trading all around the place. And it just took this one person on social media to pipe up and
Lisa,
start talking about it.
which is the next one? Just give me, I'm asking for a friend.
I can't
How about AMC?
reveal
That
any
was another
details.
one, too. AMC was another one of those.
They're going to move on Planet of the Apes?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
But it's just, you see these meme stocks and you're like, oh, well, Tom, AMC Entertainment up 19.5%
There you go.
today. So there you go. On 30 million shares trading of a company that has 1 billion market cap.
The VIX 13.41. With your news in New York City, here's John Tucker.
All right, Tom, Paul, and Lisa, the star prosecution witness in the hush money trial of former President Trump, set to take the stand today. Let's get the latest from Bloomberg law host June Grasso at New York.
On Friday, jurors saw Donald Trump's 2018 tweets defending a $130,000 hush money agreement with adult film actress Stormy Daniels, ahead of potentially explosive testimony from Michael Cohen, the star prosecution witness who made the payment on Trump's behalf. Prosecutors have been laying the groundwork for Cohen's testimony because he comes to the stand with a lot of baggage that will surely be explored on cross-examination. In New York, June Grasso, Bloomberg Radio.
And Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has delivered some of the Biden administration's strongest public criticism yet of Israel's conduct in the war in Gaza. Blinken says that Israeli tactics have meant a horrible loss of life of innocent civilians, but have failed to neutralize Hamas leaders.
They will be left holding the bag on an enduring insurgency because a lot of armed Hamas will be left, no matter what they do in Rafah. Or if they leave and get out of Gaza, as we believe they need to do, then you're going to have a vacuum, and a vacuum that's likely to be filled by chaos, by anarchy, and ultimately by Hamas again.
Secretary of State Blinken, speaking on CBS's Face the Nation, heard Sundays right here on Bloomberg. Over the weekend, anti-war protesters disrupted several college graduation ceremonies. A number of grads at Duke University walked out of Jerry Seinfeld's commencement speech Sunday in protest to the comedian's vocal support of Israel. Some chanted Free Palestine as they left, according to social media posts and videos inside the ceremony. And officials in Baltimore, Maryland say demolition of the last remaining span of the Francis Scott Key Bridge is scheduled for today. The goal is to have that entire channel leading in and out of the port of Baltimore reopened by the end of this month. And let's conclude with this one. The curator at the American Museum of Natural History here in New York, detained in Turkey, in Istanbul, while allegedly attempting to smuggle spider and scorpion samples. The curator said he had permits from the government to conduct his research. Lorenzo Predini, an expert on arachnids at the New York Museum, was held by police at Istanbul airport while allegedly trying to take about 1,500 samples out of the country. You want to take spiders out of,
I was going to say,
let them go.
He could just come over to the Tucker house.
Exactly. Go up in the attic.
I opened the lawnmower shed for the first time to do the lawn, and yes, there was a spider nest in there. Actually, it's kind of fascinating.
Of course it was.
I mean, I let them go about their business.
Have any of you seen a black widow spider?
They're tiny, and they have a little hourglass on their belly, or at least the females.
But have you seen one like in your, lawnmower?
It's true. The females, like most, are deadly.
Hey,
Spiders. Easy.
The black widow. Okay.
We don't have them yet in New Jersey.
Can we have a moment of silence for June Grosso? She was the first person to interview me at Bloomberg. I walked in, from New Jersey said, just shut up and talk to this guy with a bow tie. Maybe he knows it. And June was a saint. I was sweating bullets. I was so nervous.
Were you in legal jeopardy at the time?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I was, as a matter of fact.
She doesn't do that kind of law.
Folks, June Grosso is the #1 lawyer academic on radio and TV today. Wellesley College, wandered by Columbia in journalism, and her law degree is from a small school up on the Cambridge River, Charles River. In Cambridge, Massachusetts. She's stunningly qualified to be the adult in the room on this trial that we're seeing in New York City. And we don't talk enough about June Grosso.
I know.
She doesn't get up.
She's a legal analyst.
She'd be on like once a week, twice a week, but her people say we can't.
She reads all these opinions and stuff.
We stole June from Court TV.
Yeah.
Remember that?
And she's like the real. I mean, folks, I really want to say, with all this litigation stuff, she is like a dyed-in-the-wool hardcore lawyer and hugely qualified. June Grosso, good morning. She's not up for another 20 minutes. Dow up 101 points. Bloomberg's surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks are advancing. This is after the major averages capped a winning week with small moves and a mixed close on Friday. Now, this comes ahead of key economic data, PPI tomorrow, CPI retail sales on Wednesday. So right now we have the Dow up 0.2%, S&P 500, that's little change. Same for the NASDAQ right now. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.83%, down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.47%, down 2 basis points. Checking in with commodities, spot gold lower 2,343 an ounce. We have Brent crude at $83 a barrel. Shares of Alphabet, they're falling. They're down 2% after Bloomberg reports that Apple closing in on an agreement to use OpenAI's technology on the iPhone. We have Apple shares up 1%. And then news about Intel, their shares up nearly 3%. Wall Street Journal reporting advanced talks for a deal where Apollo would provide more than $11 billion to help that company build a plant in Ireland. And of course, taking another peek at GameStop right now.
Please.
Those shares up 68%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
When Lisa started, it was trading, and now it's trading halted again, up 68%, $29.47. He's the underwriter for the meme ETF group. Alec Balchunas joins us right now. Is there an ETF for meme stocks?
It's funny, there used to be. It just shut down. It should have just hung in there. There's so many stories of ETFs that close right before their number comes up. Yeah, we see that over and over. There was a short squeeze ETF that closed right before the GameStop situation happened. So, ironically, the meme ETF, which was launched because of the GameStop situation, has now closed. But there are other sort of thematic ETFs and ways to play that for sure.
Right. Are you of the opinion of GameStop trading again? It's plummeted. It's up 66%. Right now, but GameStop seriously is trading at $29 per share. Are you of the opinion that many ETFs that are marketing ideas or thematic ideas should be put out of their misery?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because I feel like some of these wacky thematic narrative conversational alpha, as we like to call them, ETFs.
Conversational alpha?
Because these are conversations that the advisor can have with their client, whether it's infrastructure. I know, quants always laugh at that, but look, thematic ETFs have, if you took all the sectors, thematic ETFs are the second biggest sector, right? Only tech ETFs have more. So they're no joke. What they really do is repackage actual factors. So a lot of them are growth or value. They just put them in nice names like innovation or natural resources.
Something moves for 6 weeks and you come up with an ETF, right? Because it's a marketing thing and you want the fees.
And then if Eric writes it up in Bloomberg, then it's real. If he doesn't cover it, it's not real.
Let me make a case for theme ETFs. Couple things. First, if you have a bunch of cheap beta index funds in your core, you're paying 5 bips total in. It's great, but it takes it takes 30 years to compound that. That's when the magic happens. So you get a little bored. So let's say you just want to speculate. So people have a little hot sauce bucket for stuff that just want to entertain them, speculate. This is where themes.
Which bucket is BitDog in?
Theme. That would be the hot sauce bucket for sure. I don't think anybody besides the hardcore faithful are using Bitcoin as their whole portfolio. I think they're buying 1%. That's what we're seeing in the 13F so far. But a great theme ETF that we just wrote about, Paul is right, I do write about these sometimes, is the uranium ETFs. This is an interesting area because if you look at the uranium stocks, right, they're benefiting from this sort of
There are uranium stocks?
Yeah. Okay. There's about 20, 25. And then sometimes they expand it to use utility companies and play the whole nuclear theme. But this is a big deal because a lot of these companies are going up a lot because the sentiment around nuclear energy is shifting as a way to fight climate change and get to net zero. They just opened a plant in Michigan. But a lot of these stocks are not in the S&P 500. They're not in the MSCI EFA. So if you have a boring core, a lot of times theme ETFs go out and bring you stocks that are in their like toddler or teenage era that aren't old enough to make it into the big indexes. So as long as the active share of the theme ETF is like over 90%, I think it does have some value if you truly believe in that theme and want to catch a piece of that early action.
Folks, if you're on the Bloomberg terminal, BI space ETF is Balchunas' work. He's to blame for it all, but it's everything you need to know about the ETF business. And I do traffic there once in a while, and he's got like an ETF of the month, and I'm almost afraid to ask, What is your ETF of the month this month?
Pretty tame one. UTS. It's a Virtus Reeves utility ETF. Believe it or not, this thing's up 25% in the past 3 months. The S&P's up 4%. Isn't that weird? Did you know utilities?
Well, we just are learning about that. Tom and I were
Well,
talking.
we had on the banker from Citigroup, Mr. Rekate, I should say, and he made very clear this AI utility electricity reach is a story.
So we like this. It was the ETF of the month. First of all, to make our filter, you have to have your volume jump by 50%, and you also have to have your 3-month return overshadow your year-to-date. So UTS has both. So among that list, we then qualitatively just pick the one that we think is most interesting. In this case, you're right. It's an AI theme, but with value stocks. I have not seen that. Normally, AI is associated with growth stocks. That's kind of intriguing, right? And this ETF obviously is active, and they've beaten the XLU. So you say active is dying, but every now and then you find a diamond in there, and UTS is it.
You mentioned the Bitcoin ETFs. With a little bit of hindsight here, who bought that stuff? Like real people, institutions, or who was buying the Bitcoin spot ETFs?
So we're seeing a bunch of advisors. So IBIT has 250 companies that have reported owning it so far. 13F season ends in a couple days. So let's say it goes to 300 probably. That blows away the number for the first 13F season for a new launch. Like the other ones that launched that same week have like 0 to 5 holders. So having 300 alone is just a lot. Okay. We're seeing advisors, like there's Kansas City advisor I saw called United. They bought them. Their picture, they look so wholesome, perfect advisor, 1%. Then you've got hedge funds buying them. A couple Hong Kong hedge funds, believe it or not, bought a bunch. We just saw one today called Bracebridge that is now the biggest owner of ARCB and IBIT, holds 300 million total. That's a hedge fund, an absolute return hedge fund.
How does the industry, long-only mutual funds, Securities Exchange Act of 1936, I think it was 34, how do they respond to the Eric Balchunas world? I don't get how they survive. I just don't get. They don't have the secret sauce, and they're losing the value sauce at the same time.
Yeah, the way to survive, and a lot of them have been better at this than others, is you got to hire someone who sounds like me, who's like really drank the ETF Kool-Aid, is a true believer, and let them do their thing inside your company. Don't bother them. Even if you're going to cannibalize your mutual fund business a little bit, it just has to be. Every business goes through this. Taxi cabs are having to deal with Uber, right? The music industry had to deal with the MP3. Disruption is normal. So the firms that fight it, and you can tell, sometimes you'll see an ETF person get hired by an old school mutual fund company, and you never hear from them again. It's like they were lost or muzzled or something. And then other cases, like a JP Morgan, where the person seemed to have been given the keys, they're thriving, and they're moving up the leader. And some of these companies are in the top 15 issuers, and they're really, putting their flag in the ground in the future.
Should I expect to see Fidelity at the top of the ETF people?
So we're bullish Fidelity, but they haven't done much in 10 years. Fidelity, I would say, is an example of somebody who might be picking revenue over growth in the future, because they haven't really unleashed their ETF people. I think they're 15th or 14th in assets, but so they're starting to do some things that are interesting. They're converting mutual funds to ETFs, which is a big way to sort of get your assets up quick. They launched the Bitcoin ETF. So we think they're making some moves. We look for Fidelity to be in the top 10 by the end of this year.
Eric's looking a little peaked after the Fontainebleau for 3 weeks. Where's your next road trip?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I told you, Europe. Going to Amsterdam, Paris, and London for Bitcoin, and ETF event that we're having at Bloomberg on the 12th of June. Nice. You're invited.
I mean, you can't.
You want to go out? I'll get you a speaking slot.
Exactly. We know the players here, Tom. Eric can take care of us.
These guys are huge. Pharaohs in Paris.
Yep.
David Solomon, Amory Horton's out in the Civil War fields with Janet Yellen, and Mr. Micklethwaite's in Paris with Mr. McCoy.
Well, good. We got it all covered.
That's all.
We're holding down the fort here.
Paul Sweeney and Alex Steele here moving forward.
Yep.
Bitcoin, first quote of the day, 62,000, I think we are in Bitcoin. Yes, almost 63,000 is, 40 years ago, which is frightening. Luther Vandross helping out Mr. Wonder. Happy birthday, Stevie Wonder.